It was much more than a schoolgirl crush for Mandy Boardman when she met a charming man twice her age.
David knew how to make me feel nice and pretty and wanted. He was definitely a good guy.
But Mandy's intense infatuation was obscuring David's disturbing desires.
He's the devil incarnate.
Mandy was absolutely in danger.
And Mandy was forced to make the toughest decision of her life when she discovered how far he would go.
It was monstrous how anybody could just do that.
It was unbelievable. Unbelievable what I saw.
When it comes to love and marriage, things aren't always as they seem. Mandy Boardman has always thought of herself as mature for her age. Even at 17 years old, she wasn't one to party or break the rules.
I was pretty responsible. I didn't really have time to be wild. I had a job, I had school, I played softball. I grew up a block away from the ball fields, and it was the place to be.
So in the spring of 1996, Mandy was excited to join a co-ed adult softball league within her close-knit Indianapolis community.
At 17, you become an adult when it comes to softball, so you have to join an adult league, and I decided that I would sub for a team, so I would get my fix.
Through the team, Mandy met all kinds of people, including 35-year-old David Wise.
Hi, my name's David. What's your name?
David worked at a shipping company, was a fine ball player, and seemed keen on offering Mandy extra support.
He was much older than me, but he was very nice to me and very polite. He would let me know how he appreciated me being there subbing for the team.
Good catch.
So when David made his true intentions known shortly after Mandy turned 18 by asking her out on a date, Mandy wasn't the least bit put off by their sizable age difference.
He just took me to a local Italian restaurant, and it was very quiet, nice. There was definitely an attraction there, and he always knew how to make me feel pretty and wanted.
Mandy and Dave were kind of an odd pairing, and it might have been because of the age difference. So to me, they were a little odd, but they seemed happy.
Unfortunately, not everyone was as thrilled as Mandy about her new boyfriend.
I was not a happy mommy, not happy at all. And I told her, I said, he's way too old for you. He could be your father. And she said, but he's not, you know, and I was like, well, he could be, so that makes him too old for you.
I always felt my mother was overprotective. It was very normal of her to be concerned about who I was dating, which probably made me want to date him even more.
Mandy knew her feelings for David were different, but she became concerned when she noticed the amount of alcohol he seemed to consume regularly.
I was not a drinker. I did not do that. So being around somebody who was always doing it was just very uncomfortable. So I did tell him, I'm okay if you drink a couple beers every now and then, but the hard stuff had to stop.
You've been drinking way too much.
And to her pleasant surprise, David completely listened to her request.
He stopped drinking. You know, he actually even stopped drinking beer. I felt if he's gonna quit drinking for me, this is gonna be great because he obviously wants to make me happy.
Within a year, it became obvious that marriage was in Mandy's near future.
David and I had spoken about marriage a couple times, and I said to myself, if I was going to get married, I'm going to make sure that I'm going to be married forever.
That spring, Mandy wed David in a simple ceremony in front of family and friends, much to Mandy's mother's dismay.
It broke my heart because of the fact that I disliked him. I was really no part of it at all, none. And so I sat in the very last row, and I wore completely black.
It was not very encouraging. But I was in love with him, and we were going to get married, and not hell or high water was going to stop me.
But hell is exactly where Mandy would find herself. And when she slowly uncovered the layers of David's deceptions, it would become clear Mother does know best.
I almost lost my breath.
This is some pretty weird, sick stuff that's going on.
I was just so dumbfounded and shocked. I never thought something like this would happen to me.
In the spring of 1998, Mandy Wise was determined to prove to everyone that her marriage to new husband David was a success.
That's what you do. You get married and you're married forever.
Mandy's not a quitter. She will try to her last breath to keep right on going, and she wanted everything to work out.
And indeed, it seemed it would. When nearly 9 months to her wedding day, Mandy delivered a healthy baby boy. And 1 year later, she became pregnant again, this time with a daughter. But by the time their little girl was born in December 2001, Mandy noticed that David seemed to be falling back into an old habit.
The drinking had gotten to a point where it became more often. People around us started noticing and making comments.
He was more boisterous, more obnoxious. If he was awake, he pretty much had a beer in his hand.
Fine. Fantastic.
Mandy had no clue why David had suddenly gone back on his word to stop drinking and decided to confront him one evening.
What is wrong with you?
I tried to explain to David that not only was I not wanting to accept his drinking,
Promise me.
but I didn't want an alcoholic around my children.
You're so sick. I'm so sick of this.
I'm yelling at him.
What's wrong with you? No, you.
He's yelling back at me, and he smacked me. I was just so shocked. It was definitely a tipping point. He never apologized. And so from that point on, it seemed like arguments weren't just arguments. They were wars.
Soon, Mandy and David were arguing over everything.
David and I didn't have a very great, intimate relationship because I didn't want to do it.
You're so drunk and I don't want to sleep with you.
The attraction was gone. And he would just push and push and push. And so I would finally just be intimate so that we could get the argument over with and move on.
Mandy refused to admit defeat, so over the next few years, she did her best to ignore the husband-shaped elephant in the room. She started her own cleaning company and focused on her kids instead.
I think she wanted everybody to feel like she was in a good marriage. Most of us could see that it was a little rocky.
By 2005, with all Mandy had going on, she wasn't too alarmed when she began feeling incredibly groggy, even after getting a solid night's sleep.
I was finding myself in the middle of the day not being able to keep my eyes open. I couldn't figure out exactly what was going on with me.
There was many, many times that I called there at their house, and he would answer the phone. Well, she's asleep. I said, it's 4:30 in the afternoon. Why is she sleeping?
She's tired. She's been working hard.
But when Mandy began to wake up in the middle of the night with a strange taste in her mouth, she couldn't help but take notice.
It was very bitter, very strong taste that was like stuck there and wouldn't go away.
Mandy's mind landed on the only possible explanation she could muster.
We had a canopy over our bed, and I thought, well, maybe there are spiders up in there, and they're coming down, and they're jumping in my mouth.
It's gross.
I thought, this is crazy, but what else could it be? David never seemed very concerned. It was like, oh, well, you must be eating spiders.
Go back to sleep.
As the months went by, Mandy continued to feel exhausted. By Thanksgiving 2006, she was notably tired, but looking forward to the holiday.
My father was coming. I was very excited to be cooking for my whole family.
Mandy went to sleep that night feeling happy for the first time in a long time, until she suddenly awoke to a blinding sensation.
I was woken up to a light in my face. But I look, and then I see the light go away, and I watch my husband run away.
What are you doing?
I saw him on the other side of the bed stuffing some stuff underneath the mattress. I'm like, what's going on here?
What is that? Show me. What did you do?
In the fall of 2006, Mandy Wise woke up in a panic when she caught her husband suspiciously hiding something under the mattress.
And I'm like, what's going on here? What are you doing?
Mandy ran over to the other side of the bed and discovered what David had been concealing.
I found this vial and this dropper.
What is this?
The vial has a chalky-looking liquid in it. He pretty much just sat there in silence, like I was some kind of crazy person waking up in a rage.
You are overreacting.
Well, at this time, I had the taste in my mouth, the taste that I had before. So I asked, did you do this?
Have you been putting this in my mouth?
And he's avoiding everything that I'm asking him.
Mandy, you were acting crazy.
After hours of not getting anywhere with David, Mandy decided she needed space.
So I went across the street to Nicole's house to tell her what had happened.
She was crying. She didn't know what to do. I told her I didn't feel that that was right. I would be furious with my husband if he did that to me, because it was very evident he was drugging her. He was giving her something.
A few hours later, Mandy returned home, ready to face David.
I asked him what was in that vial, and he told me that he had crushed up some Xanax to help me sleep. I said, I don't understand why you're trying to help me sleep when I am already sleeping.
You've been giving me sleeping pills. I have been sleeping fine.
And he told me that this is what I needed.
That's why she'd been so tired and lethargic and sleeping so much. And, you know, above and beyond the fact that he did what he did, what if he gave her too much? I just couldn't believe he was doing that to her.
So Mandy made David promise to never take her health into his own hands again.
I just asked him to please kindly stop. He was like, okay, I'll stop.
Won't do it again.
You promised me.
After 8 years of marriage, Mandy wasn't sure what to think.
There were so many things that were going through my head, but I wanted to believe him. I wanted to make my marriage work, so I had to believe him.
So in the winter of 2007, when Mandy awoke to a familiar light shining in her face, she was completely distraught.
I had already been through this, and I felt like I knew what was going on, so I jump up immediately. Well, David takes off.
What are you hiding? Come back here.
Shocked by his audacity, Mandy chased David out to the garage.
Where is it?
I said, show me what's underneath the cushion. And he pulls out the vial and the dropper. I was so angry.
Mandy knew David had been drugging her yet again. The question was, why? As the young mother of 2 children, Mandy wasn't sure what to do next. For the next 3 months, she and David barely spoke as she tried to work out a plan in her head.
I didn't want my kids to know what happened. I had to figure out what was going on here.
But in the fall of 2008, the reason behind all the troubling events became clear.
I was home from work, and David had left his cell phone at home. So I decided I'm gonna go ahead and investigate. So I start looking through his phone, and I'm looking through texts and phone calls.
And the second Mandy opened his videos file, her heart stopped.
What I saw in the videos was nothing that I had ever expected to see in my entire life. It was horrible.
Oh my God.
Mandy didn't have much choice but to show the world what he really was.
In the fall of 2008, after discovering that her husband David had been drugging her in her sleep, Mandy Wise decided to have a look at the videos on his cell phone.
I found 3 videos. I
Oh my gosh.
saw David having sexual relations with me while I was sleeping. I looked like a corpse. It was horrible. It was almost like necrophilia. I thought, how in the world did this happen? I don't remember this.
Then it hit her. This was the reason he was drugging her.
I felt very angry. This whole time, he was lying to me, telling me that I need what he's giving me. Now I finally had proof that something seriously messed up was happening to me. I tried to send them to my email, and I couldn't figure it out on the phone. So I recorded the videos on the phone with the camcorder. That way I knew I had them.
When David arrived home, Mandy was quick to confront him.
His reaction was almost like no reaction. Like he wasn't surprised that they were there.
Mandy no longer doubted what she needed to do next. After 11 years of marriage, she filed for divorce, and David moved out.
It was very hard to take that step to let everybody know that I failed and that my marriage didn't work and break apart my family. That's probably the hardest thing I've ever done. My kids. They were just devastated.
I thought he was sick and twisted, and I asked her, are you going to take this to the police? And she said, I don't think I can. I don't want anybody to know this. He's gone. It's done. This is not going to happen to me anymore.
By October 2009, Mandy and David's divorce was final. It was difficult for Mandy to acknowledge how wrong she'd been about David.
I feel like there's somewhere where David went off the grid, and people like that are capable of doing anything. And I thought if he could do this to his wife, then he could probably do it to anybody. So I decided to make the phone call to the Indianapolis Police Department.
David Wise was arrested in August 2011 and charged with 1 count of rape and 5 counts of deviant sexual behavior. Without physical evidence, however, he could not be charged with drugging Mandy. David pled not guilty, and on April 28, 2014, after 3 years of legal battles, he went to trial. Along with the video evidence, one of David's own friends testified against him.
David called the wife of one of his friends and made some statements that something was happening to Mandy while she was asleep.
The witness told the jury David said to her that he had no sex life with his wife and admitted to drugging her to have his way.
If she's not gonna get it, I'm gonna take it.
He explained to her that he would do it so that later he could watch the videos and enjoy them during his own time. It was just unfathomable.
Even David himself testified that he had given his wife drugs for 3 years.
He had been prescribed Xanax and Ambien on a number of different occasions. David said he was experiencing lapses in judgment due to drinking.
It was more than enough evidence, and 2 days later, David Wise was convicted on all charges. But much to Mandy's surprise, the judge imposed a light sentence: 20 years with 12 years suspended and 8 years in home detention with a GPS monitor.
I was devastated. This man was able to go home and lead his life. I was terrified.
You could have knocked me over with a feather. I was like, how can they do that?
The sentence he got was for people with limited or no criminal history. Did I agree with it? I didn't. Spousal rape is a very serious crime, and anytime an adult commits a crime like this, they need to be held accountable.
But 2 months after the sentencing, David failed to charge his GPS monitor for 6 hours.
They found him at home, and he claimed that his battery had just died.
The court found he had violated his home detention rules and revised his sentence to 5 years in prison and 3 years home detention.
I almost couldn't control myself because I just was so grateful for the peace. I felt like it was finally over.
Today, Mandy knows coming forward exposed the ugly truth in her marriage that she fought so hard to hide.
I feel like what I have done has brought attention to spousal rape. And now people are becoming more aware. Everybody needs to know that if you don't give consent, there is no consent.
With everything that she's had to do, I'm very proud of her for coming forward and saying, this is me. It happened to me. I'm very proud of her for that. It takes a lot of courage.
I never thought something like this would happen to me. But I'm definitely still strong-headed. And I want to make sure that whatever I do makes a difference.
Tabitha Howe was as surprised as anyone when she fell for a boy who wasn't exactly her type.
At first, I didn't like Scott, but he made an effort, and we just became very close.
But behind Scott's kind-hearted facade was a manipulative monster.
He was just ranting and raving, and he just looked crazy.
I was scared to death he would come back in and finish what he started.
And when Tabitha opened the mail one day, she'd discover Scott's chilling secret.
It was so unique and so bizarre. Everybody was shocked.
I honestly thought he was going to kill me.
When it comes to love and marriage, things aren't always as they seem. In the summer of 1998, high school graduate Tabitha Howe was excited to strike out on her own, moving to a house with a great group of friends.
I worked right across the street at the restaurant, and we did what teenagers do. We all hung out, played video games, watched movies. We just had a good time.
But Tabitha's newest roommate, Scott Wellington, didn't seem to fit in.
Scott was working at a grocery store as a bagger, and at first I didn't like him. He was only 17, just a young kid who was arrogant.
Before long, Tabitha was pleased to see that Scott had a charming side.
He seemed like he was caring. He would notice, like, if I did my nails, which most men wouldn't notice. He picked up the house while we were at work. He seemed like a decent person. We just became very close.
Tabitha made it known she was interested in Scott, and they transitioned effortlessly from just friends into a couple.
I felt like maybe this could be something bigger. Maybe we could progress in our relationship and start building a life together. He was my first real love.
They got along well. They would also laugh at each other and tease each other. They were tickled to be together.
Over the next 2 years, Tabitha and Scott found a place of their own and spent every moment together.
We weren't rushing things. I felt I knew who he was. Everything was going pretty good.
But something was about to change all of that.
I found out I was pregnant. I was scared. I was really scared. I knew what it took to take care of a baby.
Tabitha wasn't sure how to tell Scott.
All right, sweetheart, I gotta go to work.
Okay, hon.
You all right? What's wrong?
I'm pregnant.
And he just stopped
What?
and just kind of froze, which made me panic a little.
Okay, you're pregnant. Let's do this thing.
But then he was like really excited about it. He genuinely seemed very happy. And he said he always wanted a family. And I think that Scott thought it was definitely going to be cake and just really fun, and I knew it wasn't like that at all.
9 months later, the young couple welcomed a baby boy.
Scott was a good dad. He was a really good dad. Tabitha was a very good mother. And she was happy, I was happy.
I never wanted kids, but once you hold your baby for the first time, there's nothing else that can take that place.
And by November of 2002, Tabitha had more surprising news for Scott.
I said, "You're going to be a daddy again." And he was absolutely thrilled. We already had one perfect little boy, and now we're going to have another baby.
To financially prepare, Tabitha found a job in the accounting department of a local store.
I was working nights, and Scott was working days. He went on to become a machinist, and he was making decent money. It was enough that we could get by.
But the excitement of another baby was soon eclipsed by a troubling new side of Scott.
Our son was learning to walk, and we had a small shelf up against the wall, and he grabbed onto it to steady himself, and it ended up falling on top of him. He was absolutely fine, but Scott got very angry.
Put this here.
I just thought he was being protective, but I'd never seen him really get angry before.
Then in March of 2003, life took a turn for the worse when Scott announced he'd been laid off from his job. For the next few months, Scott bounced from job to job, but nothing seemed to stick.
I would pick up any available shifts at work, but he did not do anything. He didn't do the dishes, he didn't pick up the house. He was very reluctant to actually get a job and just make some money to help out.
She was very frustrated by, always having to clean up whatever mess that was there.
Finally, in July 2003, in time for the arrival of their second son, Scott found another good job as a machinist in Greenville, just across the New Hampshire state line.
He seemed really happy. He seemed to get a little bit of that spark back and talking like things are gonna get better.
But Tabitha would soon learn that with every new high came an unbearable low.
It was a roller coaster ride. I was really scared.
And gradually, Tabitha would be swept into a whirlwind of deception so shocking, she wondered if she would even survive.
I was stunned. I couldn't quite wrap my head around what had happened.
You see this stuff in books and TV shows, you don't think it's gonna happen to you.
In July 2003, after giving birth to their second son, Tabitha Howe was relieved when her boyfriend Scott Wellington landed a promising new job as a machinist in the quaint town of Greenville.
Greenville, it seemed nice and quiet. It's a small little town. We found a cute little 2-bedroom apartment. It was so close to the post office. We were told we had to get a post office box because the mail delivery service would not deliver our mail. Scott always had the keys with him, and he would always get the mail.
With an additional mouth to feed, the couple began pulling long hours at work to support their growing family. And the stress of rarely seeing each other began to take its toll.
We were kind of like ships passing in the night. It put up a lot of barriers in between us. During Christmas, I would work until midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, and he would accuse me of being out cheating on him.
Where have you been?
I was at work.
It got to the point where I would have to print out the times that I punched in at work and punched out. I felt like Scott wanted to have complete control over me.
Tabitha was sad, and she just didn't know how to prove to him that she wasn't with other men.
Don't walk away from me.
Tabitha didn't know what to make of this new side to Scott. But even more surprising, one day that December, Scott completely blindsided her.
Scott talked about getting married. It was not something that I have ever wanted. It's just a piece of paper to me. But that's what he wanted. He wanted a real family. So he went and got a ring.
Will you marry me?
Wow.
We had 2 kids. Obviously, this was something that was long-term.
Yeah.
But we never set a date. We just stayed engaged, and I think it was really more in his mind than anything.
And after giving birth to a daughter in 2005, and then another little girl in 2009, it seemed their family was complete.
I knew I didn't want any more kids. 4 was more than enough. Scott was fine with that. It seemed like things were getting a lot better.
Then Scott arrived home one day early from work and dropped a bombshell.
Why are you home from work so early?
I quit.
I was just dumbfounded. And I said, "What do you mean you quit? How are we gonna support the kids?"
You know we need the health insurance.
I know that. Just get off my back about it.
It turned into a big fight, and he yelled and he screamed.
As Tabitha took on more hours at work, she struggled to understand why, out of the blue, Scott tossed his family into yet another financial storm. It wasn't until January of 2010 when Tabitha showed Scott a listing for a machinist job at a local company called C&M that he finally took action.
It seemed like a really great company. He called them, he went down for an interview, they ended up hiring him.
Tabitha hoped their troubles were finally behind them. But they were just getting started when Scott made a horrifying decision that would not only devastate Tabitha, but would betray his entire company.
He just sounded like he wanted to destroy her.
I was terrified. He was a completely different person.
In 2010, Tabitha Howe was thrilled when her fiancé, Scott Wellington, landed a solid job, one that enabled him to support their 4 young children, ages 1 through 9. But despite Scott making good money, he seemed to grow more irritable by the day.
We can't afford more than one line.
And before long, his controlling streak returned with a vengeance.
Scott, I really need a phone.
Scott got the home phone shut off, and that's when he really started to isolate me from everybody.
I got her another cell phone, and I paid the bill. He was not happy about that because there was nothing he could do.
And though Scott wanted more control, he didn't seem to want to spend more time with Tabitha and the kids.
He would get up really early and say he was going to work, like 3 o'clock in the morning.
Okay, thank you.
One time, I brought him to work, and I said, we'll have lunch with you. We'll have a little picnic outside. Oh, no, you can't bring the kids there. There could be metal scraps in the yard.
It's gonna be dangerous for the kids.
He made it sound like it was concern for the kids.
Then, in December 2010, just in time for the holidays, the pendulum swung again.
I have a little bit of a surprise for you.
He came home and he just started pulling money out of his pockets. And he said that he got a $3,000 bonus from work. I said, really? He said, I helped them get a really big contract. It was fabulous. So I was like, well, it's gonna be a really good Christmas for the kids.
But when Christmas Eve finally rolled around, Scott had plans of his own.
Hey, sweetheart, I think I'm gonna take off and hang out with the guys for a little bit.
Okay, that's fine.
I said, just don't be too late because, we have a lot to do. He was like, okay, he gave me a kiss. He left.
Boom! Gotcha.
Tabitha and I were online playing a game. It was just sort of a way to pass the time.
When Scott returned home later that night, it was clear something other than the holiday spirit had possessed him.
I was sitting on the computer, I was chatting with Emmy, and Scott stormed back into the house, just in a rage, just angry, yelling.
I know what you've been doing.
He started to accuse me of cheating again.
You want her? You can go ahead and take her.
And then he picked me up and threw me across the living room.
You could hear the physical tussle. You knew a physical altercation was going on. The microphone just sort of hit the desk with a thump. And then it just went silent. So I sat there, sort of stunned, and immediately started trying to call her.
I was scared. I was really scared. Now all the kids are out of bed. I said, I'm calling the police. He took off. I was terrified, and I called my mom.
She called me, crying, and said that he just went off the deep end, and he had just left on foot. She asked me to come up there, and I did.
She finally texted me. She was okay, that her mom was on the way, and that he had left.
Tabitha struggled to understand what had prompted the attack. But when Scott returned later that night, apparently calmed down, Tabitha let him stay.
He seemed legitimately sorry for what had happened.
I'm so sorry.
I didn't really want him back in the house, but it was Christmas Eve. I couldn't let him ruin Christmas for the kids. It's supposed to be a magical time, not the day your father leaves.
But soon what happened that Christmas would be the least of Tabitha's worries when her life took another dramatic turn, one that would end with a chilling discovery.
He's devious, crooked, he's a sociopath.
There's a very small percentage of people that are just absolutely evil. It shocked me.
I was terrified, and I thought, was this his plan all along?
On Christmas Eve 2010, Tabitha Howe was suddenly attacked by her partner of 12 years, Scott Wellington. But she allowed him to come back home, if only for the sake of their 4 young children.
Scott was very quiet when he came back. He seemed legitimately sorry for what had happened, but he never offered an explanation. I made the decision that night that things were completely over between the two of us, and I just needed to figure out what the next step was.
No, do not touch me.
And 3 months later, in March 2011, Tabitha couldn't take it any longer.
It's over.
We had a really big fight. Everything just came out. I just couldn't handle it anymore. I was all done. I just needed him gone. I threw him out.
Over the next month, Tabitha wanted nothing to do with Scott, but with the children, it wasn't possible.
Scott was supposed to come and see the kids for Easter, and we had agreed upon that.
As Tabitha prepared for the visit, she kept busy by running a few errands.
I was going to the grocery store, and I stopped to get the mail.
Getting the mail had always been Scott's job. So when Tabitha opened their P.O. box, she was floored at the number of unpaid bills. But it was what she found in another envelope that tore her world apart.
There was a card in there, and I figured it's from my grandparents to the kids. I didn't think anything of it, so I opened it up, and it's a sympathy card with some money orders in it. And I start reading it. Dear Scott, we're so sorry for the loss of your wife. You and your kids are in our prayers. I'm like, who is this for? You know, they must have made a mistake. Somebody sent this to the wrong address. I have no idea what's going on. But then I kind of started to wonder, was Scott planning on killing me? Was this his plan all along? I was terrified. Why would he tell people I was dead? I called Scott. I said, don't come and see the kids. Don't come to my house. Don't come anywhere near me.
The following Monday morning, Tabitha spoke with Scott's boss, who was surprised to see her alive and well. As they discussed the circumstances surrounding the card, Tabitha learned the situation was far worse than she imagined. Not only had Scott told his colleagues she'd passed away, he had done so after weaving a year-long tragic tale about a mythical battle with cancer.
Scott told them that I had been diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer and that I was getting sicker and sicker by the day. He then told them that I had to have a double mastectomy and that it wasn't looking good.
In turn, his company had given Scott almost $7,000 in donations to help offset the mounting medical costs, plus several weeks of paid time off. Right around the time Tabitha kicked him out, Scott told his company that she had died.
Certain things started to make sense. He didn't want me to go out. He didn't want me to be seen by people. He didn't want me to bring the kids to work for lunch because I was supposedly sick at home, withering away and dying. He wanted to have complete control over me and isolate me.
That day, Tabitha got a restraining order against Scott, while Scott's boss contacted police and pressed charges.
The owner of the company explained to me he had to report a theft, and the story of the theft was bizarre, to say the least. I had Scott come in for an interview, and he didn't try to lie or deny anything that had happened. He painted the picture that the family was hard on times, and he was trying to make ends meet as best he could. That was his motivation.
Never supposed to get to this level.
Scott was charged with 2 counts of theft by deception, one for the amount of $5,000. and $2,000 for previous donations.
I knew about the $3,000 that he had gotten at Christmas, but the other money I knew nothing about. I don't know exactly what he was doing with it.
On May 16, 2011, Scott accepted a deal and pled guilty to 1 count of theft by deception, claiming he needed the money to support his family.
I don't believe anything that comes out of his mouth. He says he did it to support his family. But we didn't see that money.
Scott only spent a few days in jail and was placed on administrative probation.
I realize he didn't kill anybody, but he took advantage of people. I think he should have gone away for a while. I do.
It's absolutely ridiculous. These people were trying to help somebody out who they thought was having a difficult time, and he didn't care. That's sick. Absolutely just sick.
Today, Tabitha still struggles to understand how and why her teenage love turned into such a master manipulator.
Scott was very smart in the way that if he lied to you, he could remember that. And he would continue with that lie for as long as it took. And thinking about not getting married, that was definitely when I knew I made the right choice.
As time passed, Tabitha tried to move beyond all the hurt and devastation Scott caused. She focuses on being a survivor.
Tabitha is fantastic. She's doing very well with the kids. The kids are all good. Every day she gets better and better.
He tried to destroy me, but I'm back to who I originally was, and I believe I'm stronger for it. I have a full-time job. I take care of my kids. I can do this on my own.
The call came in at 2:17 a.m., slicing through the stillness of a small Texas town like a blade through glass, a single voice on the line whispering words that would echo for decades. There's a car abandoned by the river. The door's still open, the engine's cold, and there's blood on the seat. In the pale glow of rotating sirens, deputies stood frozen, staring into a silence that felt too heavy, too deliberate, as if the night itself were holding its breath. The river moved slowly, black and unreadable, swallowing the reflections of flashing lights, carrying secrets downstream. Somewhere in that darkness, a life had vanished, and in its place, an emptiness had formed, a void that would become a cold case, a wound that never quite healed. The victim's name was Emily Carter, 23 years old, a college student home for the summer, known for her easy laughter, her restless curiosity, her habit of driving alone late at night with the windows down and the radio low, chasing the comfort of motion. She had left a friend's house just before midnight, promising to call when she got home. That call never came. Instead, there was only the abandoned sedan, angled awkwardly on the gravel shoulder, a faint smear of blood across the driver's seat, a single shoe on the floorboard, and the lingering scent of gasoline and fear. No struggle marks in the dirt. No shattered glass. No obvious signs of violence. Just absence. Just the terrifying quiet of a life cut out of the world without explanation. By sunrise, the news had spread, carried by radio, by text messages, by whispered conversations over coffee. A missing young woman. A suspicious scene. The word cold case had not yet entered the conversation, but its shadow already loomed. Search teams fanned out along the riverbanks, combed through fields, scanned tree lanes, called her name into the wind until their voices grew hoarse. Helicopters hovered overhead, stirring dust and hope in equal measure. Divers slipped into the murky water, their flashlights piercing only inches ahead, probing a world that swallowed sound and light alike. Every hour that passed tightened the knot in the town's collective chest. Every unanswered question fed a rising dread. Emily's parents arrived at the scene just as the sun began to crest the horizon, their faces drained of color, their eyes fixed on the empty car as if it might speak, might confess what it had seen. Her mother traced the edge of the open door with trembling fingers, as though she could still feel her daughter's presence lingering in the metal. Her father stood rigid, jaw clenched, absorbing details like blows. The bloodstain, the missing purse, the scattered items on the seat. In that moment, hope and terror coexisted in a fragile balance. Maybe she had wandered off, disoriented. Maybe she had been picked up by someone she trusted. Maybe she would walk out of the woods, embarrassed but alive. Maybe. The investigation began with urgency bordering on desperation. Detectives reconstructed her final hours, tracing phone records, interviewing friends, replaying security footage from gas stations and traffic cameras. They mapped her route, minute by minute, mile by mile, searching for the moment when ordinary routine gave way to catastrophe. Witnesses reported seeing her car near the river shortly after midnight, headlights dim, moving slowly, as if uncertain. One truck driver claimed he noticed a second vehicle parked nearby, a dark pickup with tinted windows, idling without lights. Another local remembered hearing a faint scream carried by the wind, dismissed at the time as nothing more than wildlife. Each fragment of information hovered on the edge of meaning, tantalizing yet incomplete, refusing to coalesce into clarity. Days turned into weeks. The river gave up nothing. Fields yielded only tire tracks blurred by rain. Forensic analysis of the blood suggested injury, but not fatal trauma, a finding that sustained hope even as it deepened the mystery. Where was she? Why leave her car behind? Why abandon a shoe, a phone charger, a half-finished cup of coffee? The town organized vigils, candle flames flickering against faces etched with worry. Yellow ribbons appeared on fences, on mailboxes, on lampposts, a visual plea for answers. Emily's photographs circulated endlessly, her smile becoming a symbol of absence, a reminder of how quickly normalcy could be stolen. As the months dragged on, the investigation slowed, then stalled, not from lack of effort, but from lack of leads. Tips poured in at first, hundreds of them, each one pursued, each one collapsing into dead ends. Rumors took root, whispers of serial predators passing through. Speculation about secret relationships, hidden conflicts, unknown enemies. Theories multiplied, tangled, contradicted one another, leaving investigators wading through a swamp of possibilities with no solid footing. The case file thickened. The evidence locker filled. The questions remained. By the first anniversary of her disappearance, the word cold case began to surface, tentative at first, then with growing resignation. It was a phrase heavy with implication, suggesting not just unanswered questions, but the slow erosion of certainty, the creeping fear that some truths might never emerge. For Emily's family, the designation felt like a second loss, a quiet admission that the world was moving on even if they could not. They refused to let her name fade, holding press conferences, funding private searches, offering rewards, clinging to any scrap of possibility. Every unknown woman spotted in a diner, every distant silhouette on a highway shoulder, triggered a rush of hope followed by crushing disappointment. Then, years later, when the town had learned to carry the weight of the mystery like a chronic ache, something unexpected happened. A letter arrived. No return address. No signature. Just a few pages, typed, precise, unsettling. It described the night Emily vanished in chilling detail, the smell of the river, the damp gravel underfoot, the sound of her breathing as panic took hold. It mentioned the blood on the seat, the discarded shoe, the dark pickup parked nearby. It revealed facts never released to the public. And buried in the final paragraph, a confession, partial and fragmented, as though the writer were both compelled and terrified to speak. I was there. I saw what happened. I helped. The words landed like a detonation, sending shockwaves through a community that had long resigned itself to uncertainty. The letter reopened wounds and ignited new ones. Detectives who had once closed the file dusted it off, their skepticism colliding with a cautious surge of hope. Was this the key they had waited for, or just another cruel illusion? Handwriting experts scrutinized the pages. Linguistic analysts dissected sentence structures, word choices, punctuation patterns, hunting for clues to identity. The postmark traced back to a neighboring county, broad enough to include thousands of potential senders, narrow enough to sharpen focus. Suddenly, the past was no longer static. It stirred, restless, demanding attention. Emily's parents received a copy of the letter late one evening, delivered by a solemn detective who could not meet their eyes. They read in silence, line by line, absorbing the unbearable intimacy of details only a witness or perpetrator could know. Her mother broke down halfway through, the paper slipping from her grasp, the words too heavy to hold. Her father read on, jaw clenched, each sentence etching itself into his memory. A map of a night he had spent years imagining and fearing. The confession did not offer closure. It opened a door into deeper darkness, revealing not answers, but a maze. The town reacted with a volatile mix of hope and suspicion. Every stranger became a potential suspect. Every neighbor a possible keeper of secrets. Old grudges resurfaced. Long-forgotten rumors gained new traction. A mechanic remembered a late-night customer asking for a car wash. A bartender recalled a jittery man nursing a drink until dawn. A former boyfriend found himself under renewed scrutiny, his alibi dissected, his past mistakes paraded as evidence of capability. The atmosphere thickened, charged with anticipation and dread, as if the truth were finally within reach, yet might still slip away. Detectives retraced every step of the original investigation, now armed with the letter's cryptic guidance. They returned to the river, to the gravel turnout, to the gas station captured on grainy surveillance footage. They re-interviewed witnesses, pressing harder, listening closer, searching for cracks in old stories. Subtle discrepancies emerged. Timelines shifted. Memories, once vague, sharpened under renewed pressure. A truck seen that night suddenly gained a license plate fragment. A shadowy figure glimpsed near the Trioline acquired a rough description. Each new detail felt like a thread, fragile yet promising, capable of unraveling years of silence if pulled just right. Yet for all the momentum, the core mystery remained intact. Where was Emily? What exactly had happened in those unseen minutes by the river? And who had waited all these years to speak, choosing now of all times to send a confession that confessed everything and nothing at once? The letter's author had vanished back into anonymity, leaving investigators chasing echoes. Every attempt to trace the source hit bureaucratic walls, jurisdictional gaps, technological limits of the mid-2000s. The past resisted excavation, guarding its secrets with stubborn resolve. As the reopened cold case dominated headlines, the story took on a life of its own, feeding late-night talk shows, true crime forums, and endless speculation. The public dissected every known detail, constructing elaborate narratives that blurred the line between fact and fiction. For the family, the noise was both a blessing and a curse, keeping Emily's name alive while drowning them in relentless reminders of loss. For the detectives, it was a high-stakes gamble, a race against time, memory, and mortality, knowing that witnesses aged, evidence degraded, and the truth, if not seized, might slip permanently beyond reach. And so the case hovered in a liminal space, suspended between revelation and obscurity, propelled by a hidden confession that promised everything and delivered only shadows. The river still flowed, indifferent. The gravel turnout remained, unmarked, blending into the landscape as if nothing extraordinary had ever occurred. But beneath that quiet surface, tension coiled, waiting. Because somewhere, in a place not yet illuminated, someone knew exactly what happened on that night in Texas, in 2005, when a young woman drove into darkness and never returned, and the long, haunting echo of her disappearance began. The renewed investigation unfolded like a slow detonation, its shockwave rippling through every street, every home, every memory the town had tried to bury. Detectives moved with a precision sharpened by regret, acutely aware that years of silence had allowed trails to cool, witnesses to drift, and evidence to decay. The letter lay at the center of their war room, pinned beneath glass, its stark lines glowing under fluorescent lights, a silent provocation daring them to decipher its meaning. Every word was dissected, every comma weighed, the syntax studied as though it were a fingerprint, the cadence of the sentences treated like a heartbeat that might betray the writer's identity. They began by rebuilding the night from the ground up. Not the official version, not the tidy timeline preserved in yellowed reports, but the raw sequence of moments as they might truly have unfolded. They reassembled phone logs, credit card swipes, gas station receipts, traffic camera snapshots, each data point a pixel in a blurred image. Emily's last text, sent at 11:47 p.m., a casual message promising to be home soon. A brief call to her voicemail at 12:03, as though she had attempted to check a missed notification. The sighting of her car near the river at 12:18. Then nothing. A void stretching into infinity. The river, once merely a geographic feature, now loomed as a character in its own right, an accomplice of silence. Teams returned to its banks with modern equipment, sonar scanners probing depths that earlier divers could barely reach, drones hovering overhead, mapping currents, identifying hidden eddies where a body might lodge unseen. They dredged sections where sediment had accumulated, hauling up twisted metal, waterlogged debris, fragments of forgotten lives, but no trace of Emily. Each empty haul deepened the dread that the river had already claimed and concealed whatever it was asked to hide. Meanwhile, the letter's details guided them to overlooked angles. The mention of damp gravel suggested a specific stretch of riverbank, one where runoff collected and moss clung stubbornly to stones. The reference to a nearby stand of mesquite trees narrowed the field further, focusing attention on a turnout long dismissed as insignificant. Investigators spent days combing the area, metal detectors sweeping the ground, forensic specialists sifting soil through fine screens, searching for fibers, hair, anything that might have escaped earlier notice. They recovered fragments of cloth, a rusted buckle, a shard of plastic that might once have been part of a headlight, but nothing definitive, nothing that could anchor a theory. The dark pickup described in the letter became an obsession. Old traffic citations were cross-referenced. DMV records scoured for matching vehicles registered within a 100-mile radius. Mechanics were interviewed about late-night repairs. Scrap yards were questioned about suspicious disposals. A handful of trucks fit the description, but each lead collapsed under scrutiny, their owners producing alibis, time cards, receipts, witnesses. The vehicle remained a phantom, a shadow glimpsed and then swallowed by time. As the search widened, so did the pool of suspects, resurrecting names long relegated to footnotes. The ex-boyfriend with a volatile temper, whose relationship with Emily had ended weeks before her disappearance. The co-worker who harbored an unspoken infatuation, lingering near her car after shifts. The drifter seen hitchhiking along the highway that night, later arrested in another state for unrelated crimes. Each figure was dragged back into the harsh light of renewed scrutiny, their past statements re-examined, their timelines reconstructed, their lives turned inside out. For some, it was an inconvenience. For others, a nightmare reborn. Interviews took on an edge, detectives pushing harder, probing deeper, aware that memory is a fragile, malleable thing. Stories shifted under pressure. Minor inconsistencies surfaced, perhaps innocent, perhaps not. A witness who once insisted she had been asleep all night now admitted to stepping outside around midnight to smoke, glimpsing headlights near the river. A convenience store clerk, previously certain no one unusual had come through, recalled a nervous man purchasing cigarettes and bottled water, his hands shaking as he counted change. Each revelation sent investigators racing down new paths, only to find them fading into uncertainty. The letter's confession hovered like a specter, tantalizing and infuriating in equal measure. It admitted presence, hinted at complicity, but stopped short of full disclosure, as though the writer were testing the waters, measuring the consequences of truth. Analysts debated the psychology behind it. Was it a bid for absolution? A taunt? An attempt to shift blame? Or a genuine effort to unburden a conscience grown too heavy to bear? The tone suggested conflict, a mind at war with itself, torn between secrecy and the desperate need to speak. Efforts to trace the letter intensified. Postal routes were mapped. Sorting facilities identified. Surveillance footage, grainy and incomplete, was reviewed frame by frame, hunting for a glimpse of the sender. A hooded figure dropping an envelope into a mailbox at dawn. A car idling briefly before pulling away. Each blurred shape became a potential breakthrough, yet none offered certainty. The trail remained frustratingly diffuse, dissolving into anonymity just beyond reach. As weeks stretched into months, pressure mounted. Media outlets dissected every development, amplifying speculation, fueling public demand for resolution. True crime enthusiasts flooded tip lines with theories, some ingenious, others fantastical. The investigation team struggled to filter signal from noise, to maintain focus amid a cacophony of voices clamoring for answers. For Emily's family, the renewed attention reopened old wounds, each headline a reminder of the night their world fractured. Hope flickered, but it was tempered by the memory of years spent chasing shadows. Then came the second communication. Shorter. More guarded. A postcard, mailed from a truck stop 200 miles away, bearing only a few lines. You're looking in the right place. Not everyone who was there wants the truth to come out. Ask about the bridge. No signature. No explanation. Just another breadcrumb leading deeper into the labyrinth. The bridge in question spanned a narrow tributary feeding into the river, a weathered structure locals crossed without a second thought. It had been inspected, photographed, catalogued during the original search, yielding nothing of note. Now, armed with renewed urgency, detectives returned, examining it with forensic intensity. They scraped rust, collected paint flakes, searched beneath planks, probed the surrounding undergrowth. Beneath one beam, they found a faint smear, long degraded, but testing positive for traces of blood. The discovery electrified the team. It suggested movement, relocation, a path from car to riverbank that had previously gone unnoticed. Reconstructing that route, investigators theorized a struggle carried across uneven ground, perhaps multiple individuals involved, one restraining, another watching, the third, if the letter were truthful, standing close enough to witness and assist. The notion of complicity, of layered guilt, added a chilling dimension. It implied a conspiracy of silence, an agreement forged in fear or loyalty, maintained through years of collective denial. Attention turned to groups rather than individuals, friends who had been together that night, co-workers who shared shifts and secrets, families bound by blood and obligation. Social networks were mapped, connections drawn, relationships dissected. Patterns emerged, overlapping circles, shared histories, subtle alliances. In one cluster, several individuals had provided alibis for each other, a closed loop of testimony that, while not inherently suspicious, now invited skepticism. When re-interviewed separately, their accounts diverged in small but telling ways, timelines slipping by minutes, locations shifting by blocks. One name began to surface with unsettling frequency: Daniel Reed, a local contractor known for his reclusive nature, his volatile temper, his dark pickup. In 2005, he had lived less than 3 miles from the river, his workshop position near the bridge mentioned in the postcard. He had been questioned briefly during the initial investigation, offering a simple alibi. He had been home alone, asleep. At the time, nothing contradicted his claim. Now, with fresh context, detectives scrutinized his life anew. They learned of past altercations, bar fights, restraining orders filed and withdrawn. They uncovered rumors of clandestine relationships, whispered stories of coercion and intimidation. Neighbors recalled late-night noises, engines revving, doors slamming. A former associate remembered Reed boasting cryptically about getting away with things. None of it amounted to proof, but the accumulation painted a portrait of volatility that demanded attention. Surveillance was authorized. Reed's movements were tracked, his routines mapped. Investigators hoped for a slip, a moment of carelessness, a gesture betraying buried guilt. Instead, they observed a man living an unremarkable life, working long hours, returning home to an empty house, frequenting the same diner each morning. If he carried secrets, he guarded them well. The psychological toll of the investigation deepened. Detectives wrestled with the possibility that the letter writer might never fully reveal themselves, that even with renewed momentum, the case could once again sink into unresolved limbo. They clung to each minor development as a lifeline, aware that public patience and institutional support were finite. Funding cycles, political pressures, and administrative priorities loomed, threatening to divert resources away from a pursuit already stretching the bounds of endurance. Yet the emotional gravity of the case refused to fade. Emily's image, her bright eyes and unguarded smile, haunted briefing rooms and office walls. Her parents' unwavering presence, attending every update, every hearing, every search, served as a constant reminder of what was at stake. This was not an abstract puzzle. It was a human life, suspended between memory and oblivion. As winter approached, the investigation stood at a precarious crossroads. Clues accumulated without coalescing. Suspicions sharpened without crystallizing into certainty. The hidden confession, once a beacon of hope, now felt like a mirage, perpetually receding as they advanced. Somewhere, a truth waited, buried beneath layers of fear, loyalty, and time. And until it surfaced, the cold case remained what it had always been, an open wound, a silent scream echoing through years, demanding to be heard. Winter tightened its grip on the landscape, frosting the fields and turning the river into a slow-moving ribbon of steel, and with the cold came a new kind of silence, one that settled over the investigation like a suffocating blanket. The detectives refused to let it slow them. If anything, the chills sharpened their focus, lending urgency to every step, every late-night meeting, every reevaluation of evidence that had once been dismissed as trivial. In the harsh glow of fluorescent lights, they spread photographs across long tables, pinned timelines to corkboards, traced connections with red string that crisscrossed the walls like veins in an exposed heart. The room pulsed with unresolved tension, the air thick with the unspoken fear that they were running out of time. They turned inward, revisiting the smallest details from 2005, convinced that the key lay buried in something overlooked. Evidence bags were reopened, their contents re-examined with modern techniques. Fibers once deemed inconclusive were subjected to advanced analysis. Soil samples were compared to newly mapped geological profiles. A fragment of blue thread, found on the driver's seat, was matched to a rare upholstery fabric used in a limited series of truck interiors produced that year. The revelation narrowed the pool of possible vehicles, breathing new life into the elusive search for the dark pickup. The net tightened. Mechanics across 3 counties were questioned again, their records combed for jobs matching that upholstery. One repair shop owner hesitated before admitting that, years earlier, a man had brought in a truck for extensive interior cleaning, paying in cash, insisting the work be done immediately. He described a dark pickup, tinted windows, a faint smell of bleach lingering in the cabin. At the time, he had thought nothing of it. Now, the memory returned with unsettling clarity. The description pointed once more toward Daniel Reed. Detectives paid him another visit, this time armed with sharper questions and a colder resolve. Reed greeted them with a guarded calm, his eyes flicking briefly toward the road as if measuring distances, escape routes. He repeated his old alibi, his voice steady, his posture relaxed, but subtle cracks began to show under sustained pressure. He hesitated when asked about the bridge. He deflected inquiries about the interior cleaning. His irritation flared, then receded, leaving behind a brittle composure that felt rehearsed. They left without an arrest, but with a growing conviction that he was more deeply entangled than he admitted. Yet conviction was not evidence, and evidence remained elusive. The investigation broadened once more, sweeping through Reed's past, mapping his relationships, reconstructing his movements, not just on the night of Emily's disappearance, but in the weeks leading up to it. They learned of financial troubles, of debts owed to men with violent reputations, of late-night phone calls abruptly terminated when answered. A pattern emerged, secrecy layered upon secrecy, a life conducted in half-shadows. Parallel to this, analysts continued to probe the letters, seeking the hidden confession's author. Linguistic profiling suggested a male writer, likely in his 30s at the time of writing, educated but not formally, someone accustomed to physical labor rather than academic discourse. Certain phrasing hinted at regional speech patterns common to East Texas, narrowing the geographic field. The tone revealed guilt tempered by fear, a psyche locked in perpetual negotiation with itself. It was the voice of someone who wanted to speak, yet dreaded the consequences of doing so. Then came the third message. This time it was a phone call to the tip line, distorted by a voice modulator. The words hurried, urgent. "I can't do this anymore. They're watching. If anything happens to me, look in the culvert off Highway 19. You'll find proof." The line went dead before operators could trace it. The call set the investigation ablaze. Within hours, a convoy of patrol cars descended on the desolate stretch of highway, their headlights carving tunnels through the darkness. The culvert lay half-hidden beneath overgrown brush, a concrete throat swallowing runoff and debris. Investigators crawled inside, flashlights slicing through cobwebs and shadow, their breath fogging in the cold. Deep within, wedged behind a rusted grate, they discovered a weatherproof container, sealed and taped, its surface smeared with mud and leaves. Inside lay a trove of documents, photographs, handwritten notes, and a USB drive. The photographs depicted a nightmarish tableau: the dark pickup parked near the river, a figure matching Emily's description standing beside it, fear etched into her posture, another man looming behind her. The images were grainy, poorly lit, yet unmistakable. The handwritten notes detailed a sequence of events aligning chillingly with the letter's account: a confrontation, a struggle, an unintended escalation, panic, frantic decisions made in the heat of terror. Names were partially redacted, replaced by initials, but the implications were unmistakable. The USB drive contained audio files, muffled recordings of arguments, threats, and, finally, a sobbing voice whispering apologies into the void. The discoveries sent shockwaves through the investigation. For the first time, the case possessed tangible proof of complicity, a record of that night's violence preserved by someone who had clearly anticipated a future reckoning. The evidence pointed toward a group, not a lone perpetrator, bound by a pact of silence forged in fear. It suggested that Emily's fate had not been the result of premeditated murder, but of chaos spiraling beyond control, a convergence of flawed decisions that cascaded into irreversible tragedy. Analysis of the materials revealed two distinct voices besides Emily's. One matched Reed's vocal patterns with alarming precision. The other remained unidentified, its cadence masked by static and emotional strain. Investigators raced to isolate the unknown participant, scouring social circles, employment records, and phone logs from that period. A former co-worker of Reed's, Michael Harlan, emerged as a compelling candidate. He had abruptly left town weeks after the disappearance, drifting through a series of temporary jobs across state lines. His digital footprint was sparse, his life marked by transience and avoidance. Tracking Harlan became an urgent priority. Data analysts traced financial transactions, motel check-ins, and social media fragments, assembling a fragmented map of his movements. He was finally located in a remote corner of New Mexico, living under a slightly altered name, working odd construction jobs, keeping to himself. A warrant was obtained. A task force mobilized. The arrest unfolded at dawn. Agents surrounded the modest trailer where Harlan slept, their boots crunching on frost-hardened gravel, weapons drawn, commands echoing through the thin walls. He emerged slowly, hands raised, eyes hollow, the face of a man long acquainted with flight and fear. During transport, he said nothing, his silence more damning than any protest. Interrogation revealed a psyche unraveling under the weight of years. At first, Harlan denied everything, clinging to rehearsed denials. But confronted with the culvert evidence, the recordings, the photographs, his defenses crumbled. He spoke in a halting monotone, recounting a night he had replayed endlessly in his mind, a loop of regret and terror. He described how Reed had lured Emily to the river under false pretenses, promising to help with a supposed car issue. How an argument had erupted, accusations hurled, emotions igniting into violence. How Harlan, present but paralyzed, had watched as control slipped away, as panic overtook reason. He claimed Emily had been injured, bleeding but alive, her fate sealed by a desperate decision to silence her, to avoid exposure, to preserve fragile lives at the expense of one. He admitted to helping move her, to disposing of evidence, to swearing never to speak. The confession was fragmented, haunted by sobs, punctuated by long silences. Yet even as Harlan's words filled the interrogation room, the central question remained unanswered. Where was Emily? He claimed ignorance, insisting that Reed had taken responsibility for the final part, that he had been sent away before dawn, his role concluded, his conscience left to rot in solitude. Investigators pressed, threatened, pleaded, but Harlan's knowledge ended at the edge of the riverbank. Reed was arrested hours later, his stoic mask finally cracking under the onslaught of corroborated evidence. His home was searched, his property excavated, every inch scrutinized. In a locked shed behind his workshop, detectives uncovered a blood-stained tarp, fragments of jewelry matching Emily's description, and a shovel bearing traces of soil consistent with multiple locations. The implications were chilling, yet still incomplete. The physical remains of the crime, the final proof of her fate, remained hidden. The town held its breath as news of the arrest spread. Relief clashed with horror, vindication with sorrow. Candlelight vigils transformed into somber gatherings of grief and reflection. Emily's parents stood before cameras once more, their expressions etched with exhaustion and guarded hope. Answers, at last, seemed within reach, yet the deepest wound, the uncertainty of her final resting place, continued to bleed. Search teams intensified efforts, guided by fragments of Reed's guarded statements, by cryptic hints, by the haunting geography of his known haunts. They scoured river bends, abandoned quarries, remote woodlands, places where secrecy and isolation converged. Winter yielded reluctantly, its thaw revealing layers of earth long sealed, each excavation a descent into the unknown. As days turned into agonizing weeks, the investigation teetered between breakthrough and despair. Every false lead drained morale, every empty pit eroded confidence. But beneath the fatigue pulsed a relentless determination, a refusal to allow Emily's story to conclude in silence. The cold case, once stagnant, now surged forward, driven by confession, by courage, by the desperate need for truth. And somewhere, in a place not yet illuminated, the final chapter waited, buried beneath time and soil, poised to emerge and transform anguish into a fragile semblance of closure. The thaw came slowly, reluctantly, as if the earth itself resisted revealing what it had swallowed, and with it arrived a new phase of the hunt, one that felt less like investigation and more like excavation of buried sins. Crews carved trenches through frozen soil, their shovels biting into layers of dirt that had lain undisturbed for years, each scoop a question hurled into the void. The landscape transformed into a patchwork of scars, open pits, flagged grids, mounds of displaced earth. Every site carried the same unspoken hope that beneath this layer, or the next, or the one after that, they might finally find Emily. Reed's property became ground zero. Cadaver dogs were brought in, their noses trained on the faintest traces of decay, weaving between rusted equipment and overgrown weeds, alerting at spots that drew investigators into painstaking digs. Time and again, the soil yielded nothing but rocks, roots, and the stale echoes of old labor. Each false alarm sharpened the ache in the air, tightening the tension that hung over the search teams and the waiting family alike. Reed, now stripped of bravado, offered fragments of cooperation, his statements riddled with half-truths and evasions. He admitted to confrontation, to fear, to choices made in the blur of adrenaline, but stopped short of disclosing locations. His silence was strategic, a final grasp at control in a narrative that had spiraled beyond him. Detectives pressed harder, leveraging every scrap of evidence, every inconsistency, every crack in his composure. They reminded him of the family's waiting, of the weight of unanswered questions, of the futility of further resistance. Still, he wavered, trapped between confession and self-preservation. Parallel searches fanned outward, tracing Reed's known routes, hunting grounds he frequented, remote campsites, abandoned wells, forgotten logging roads. Helicopters scanned forest canopies, thermal imaging sweeping across desolate expanses. Ground teams trudged through mud and underbrush, their boots sinking into earth softened by melting frost. Each mile covered felt like an act of penance, a tribute to the years squandered in uncertainty. Then, in the hushed dawn of a gray morning, a cadaver dog alerted near an old gravel pit 30 miles from town, a desolate scar carved into the land decades earlier and since reclaimed by scrub and thorn. The pit lay beyond a crumbling fence, its depths hidden by shadows and stagnant pools. Investigators descended cautiously, their movements deliberate, the air thick with apprehension. The ground here was different, disturbed in a way that spoke of hurried labor. Shovels struck something unnatural, a compacted layer, inconsistent with surrounding soil. Excavation began, slow and methodical. Inch by inch, the earth peeled back, revealing a tangle of fabric, then the unmistakable curve of bone. Time seemed to suspend itself, the world narrowing to the silent choreography of gloved hands and careful tools. When the remains were fully exposed, there was no doubt. The clothing matched Emily's last known outfit. A small silver bracelet, gifted by her mother, still clung to a fragile wrist. After years of absence, she had been found. The announcement reverberated like thunder. For the family, the moment was a collision of agony and relief, grief crystallizing into a form they could finally grasp. They gathered at the site, holding each other as investigators completed their grim work, the wind carrying whispered prayers and broken sobs across the pit. Closure, long sought, arrived wrapped in devastation, its comfort inseparable from loss. Forensic examination revealed the brutal truth. Emily had suffered blunt force trauma, consistent with a violent struggle. Evidence suggested restraint, transport, and a fatal injury delivered not in a single blow, but in a cascade of panic-driven acts. The findings corroborated Harlan's confession, anchoring it in physical reality, yet also deepened the horror of those final moments. She had fought. She had pleaded. She had been conscious long enough to know her fate was unfolding beyond her control. Confronted with the discovery, Reed's defenses collapsed. He wept openly, his narrative unraveling in torrents of belated remorse. He spoke of fear, of rage, of a confrontation that spiraled into catastrophe. He described the frantic drive to the pit, the laborious digging under a moonless sky, the weight of irreversible choice pressing down with every shovel of earth. His words painted a portrait of a man consumed by his own cowardice, a prisoner of decisions made in seconds and regretted for years. Yet even in confession, Reed withheld details, shaping his account to minimize his culpability, shifting blame toward Harlan, toward circumstance, toward anything but himself. Investigators challenged every discrepancy, every convenient omission, determined to extract a complete, unvarnished truth. The interrogations stretched for hours, then days, a relentless pursuit of clarity in a story steeped in distortion. As the legal process began to take shape, the town grappled with the enormity of what had been uncovered. Familiar faces were recast as monsters. Routine landmarks became haunted coordinates in a collective memory scarred by betrayal. Conversations shifted from speculation to mourning, from anger to reflection. The cold case, once an abstract puzzle, crystallized into a tangible narrative of human frailty and devastating consequence. Media attention surged anew, broadcasting the grim resolution across national platforms. Headlines blared of confessions and arrests, of a community stunned by revelations. Commentators dissected motives, psychologists analyzed behavioral patterns, and armchair detectives reconstructed timelines with morbid fascination. Amid the noise, Emily's story risked becoming spectacle, her life reduced to a series of tragic headlines. Her family fought to reclaim her humanity, sharing memories of her kindness, her aspirations, her laughter, insisting that she be remembered not for her death, but for the life she had lived. Court proceedings loomed, promising a final reckoning. Harlan, racked by guilt, cooperated extensively, his testimony a cornerstone of the prosecution's case. Reed, facing overwhelming evidence, entered a plea that spared the family a protracted trial, yet could not shield him from the weight of sentencing. The courtroom became a crucible of emotion, a space where grief, anger, and fragile hope collided beneath the austere gaze of justice. When the verdict was read, it carried the hollow resonance of inevitability. Long prison terms were imposed, their severity reflecting both the gravity of the crime and the years of evasion that had compounded its impact. As gavel struck wood, a chapter closed, yet its echoes lingered, reverberating through every life touched by the tragedy. In the quiet that followed, the town sought to heal, though healing proved elusive. Memorials were erected along the river, candles and flowers marking a place of collective sorrow. Scholarships were established in Emily's name, a gesture toward transformation, a vow that her legacy would inspire rather than simply haunt. Each anniversary, residents gathered to remember, their voices weaving a tapestry of resilience and remembrance. Yet beneath these gestures, a persistent unease remained, a recognition that the truth, once buried, had emerged too late to prevent irreversible harm. The cold case, solved at last, left behind a sobering testament to the consequences of silence, fear, and moral compromise. It underscored the fragile boundary between ordinary life and unspeakable tragedy, a boundary crossed in a single, irreversible night. As seasons turned and years advanced, the story receded from headlines, but not from memory. The gravel pit, reclaimed by grass and wildflowers, stood as a mute witness to the past. The bridge, weathered and unremarkable, spanned the tributary as it always had, yet now bore the invisible weight of association. For those who knew, every crossing stirred a faint echo of dread. And in the stillness of early mornings, when the river glided silently through its banks, one could almost sense the lingering presence of a young woman whose life had been stolen and whose story, though finally told, continued to whisper through the currents of time, a reminder that even the deepest secrets, once unearthed, cast shadows that never fully fade. The days after the verdict unfolded in a strange, disorienting calm, the kind that settles only after prolonged chaos, when the body has not yet learned how to exist without adrenaline. The courthouse emptied. The news vans departed. The flashing lights vanished from the streets. But the silence they left behind was heavier than anything that had come before, a silence dense with unanswered emotions, with words never spoken, with futures abruptly severed. In that quiet, the town began to confront a new reality. The cold case was no longer a mystery, but its resolution offered no relief, only a deeper, more complex sorrow. Emily's funeral drew mourners from across the state. They came in steady streams, filing past a simple wooden casket draped in white lilies, their faces etched with disbelief and grief. Friends remembered her laugh, a sound that once filled rooms and now lived only in memory. Professors spoke of her ambition, her plans to study environmental science, her dreams of working to protect rivers like the one that had become her final backdrop. Neighbors recalled a girl who waved from her porch, who volunteered at shelters, who stopped to help strangers with flat tires. Each story added dimension to a life too easily flattened by tragedy. Her parents stood at the center of it all, receiving condolences they could barely process, their expressions fixed in a fragile composure. For years, they had existed in a limbo of hope and terror, their days structured around the possibility of a miracle. Now, certainty replaced uncertainty, but the certainty was unbearable. They no longer wondered where their daughter was. They no longer imagined reunions. They no longer scanned crowds for familiar features. In exchange, they carried the irrevocable knowledge of her death, a burden both clarifying and crushing. In private moments, grief transformed into anger. Why had no one spoken sooner? How many chances had existed to prevent this outcome? How many people had chosen silence over conscience? These questions burned without resolution, feeding a quiet fury that simmered beneath public restraint. They demanded accountability, not just from the men convicted, but from a system that had allowed fear and secrecy to triumph for so long. The investigators, too, wrestled with their own reckoning. They revisited every decision made in 2005, every lead deprioritized, every assumption that had guided the original inquiry. In late-night conversations, they replayed scenarios, imagining alternate outcomes, wondering if a different approach might have uncovered the truth years earlier. The weight of hindsight pressed heavily, a reminder that even the most diligent efforts can falter in the face of incomplete information and human deception. Internal reviews were launched. Protocols were examined. Training programs were updated. The case became a teaching tool, a cautionary tale threaded through law enforcement seminars and forensic workshops. Its lessons were stark. The danger of early tunnel vision, the necessity of relentless follow-up, the importance of preserving even the most seemingly insignificant evidence. In this way, Emily's story began to shape practices far beyond her town, influencing investigations yet to come. Yet the human cost lingered in subtler ways. Relationships frayed under the strain of public scrutiny. Friendships dissolved as past interactions were reinterpreted through the lens of betrayal. Families withdrew, retreating behind closed doors, wary of judgment and gossip. Children grew up absorbing the unspoken trauma of a community that had learned too early how easily innocence could be lost. Michael Harlan in his prison cell became a study in remorse. He wrote letters to Emily's parents, each one an attempt to articulate regret, to convey the depth of his guilt. Some letters went unanswered. Others were returned unopened. For him, atonement became a distant, perhaps unattainable goal, overshadowed by the knowledge that no apology could undo what had been done. Daniel Reed, by contrast, retreated into a hardened silence, his confessions replaced by bitter resignation. His name faded from conversation, spoken only when necessary, a symbol of choices that had irreparably scarred countless lives. As months passed, the town sought ways to reclaim a sense of normalcy. Community events resumed. School football games once again drew cheering crowds. Seasonal festivals returned, their lights and music attempting to overwrite memories of candlelight vigils and hushed gatherings. Slowly, laughter reemerged, tentative at first, then more assured. Life, indifferent to tragedy, pressed forward. Yet beneath the surface, the case continued to resonate. Late at night, in quiet kitchens and dimly lit living rooms, residents replayed the story, revisiting its details, searching for meaning. Some fixated on the psychology of the perpetrators, attempting to understand how ordinary men could commit extraordinary evil. Others focused on the warning signs, the moments when intervention might have altered the course of events. Still others turned inward, questioning their own capacity for action in the face of wrongdoing. For Emily's parents, healing remained an elusive concept. They channeled their grief into advocacy, partnering with organizations dedicated to missing persons and cold case investigations. They spoke at conferences, met with legislators, and lobbied for improved funding and resources. Each speech was a reopening of wounds, yet also a reaffirmation of purpose. If their daughter's story could prevent even one similar tragedy, then some measure of meaning might be salvaged from devastation. They established a foundation in Emily's name, funding scholarships and search efforts, supporting families navigating the same harrowing limbo they had endured. Through this work, they encountered countless others bound by shared loss, forming a community of resilience forged in sorrow. Together, they confronted the uncomfortable truth that many cold cases never find resolution, that countless stories remain suspended in uncertainty, waiting for a catalyst that may never come. In this broader context, Emily's case stood as both a beacon and a warning. It demonstrated the power of persistence, the impact of a single confession, the difference one courageous or desperate act could make. But it also underscored the fragility of justice, the ease with which truth can be buried, and the devastating consequences of collective silence. Years later, the river still flowed as it always had, its surface betraying nothing of the secrets it once held. The gravel pit softened under layers of grass and wildflowers, nature's attempt to erase the scars of human violence. The bridge weathered another season, its rust deepening, its boards creaking beneath passing tires. To an outsider, these were unremarkable features of an unremarkable landscape. To those who knew, they were monuments, silent and immutable. In the end, the cold case did not conclude with a sense of triumph. There was no catharsis, no moment when grief dissolved into relief. Instead, there was acceptance, a slow, reluctant accommodation of reality. The truth had emerged, but it had arrived too late to spare pain, too late to restore what was lost. Its presence offered understanding, not solace. And so the story lingered, not as a closed chapter, but as a persistent echo, a reminder that every unresolved disappearance carries within it a universe of suffering, and that every confession, no matter how delayed, ripples outward, reshaping lives in ways both profound and irreversible. Time advanced with a peculiar cruelty, moving forward while refusing to carry the weight of memory with it, leaving those who remained to shoulder the burden alone. In the months after the sentencing, as public attention waned and headlines shifted elsewhere, the town entered a phase of uneasy reflection, a collective attempt to make sense of a truth that had detonated long after the moment it could have saved a life. The cold case had been reopened, unraveled, and resolved, yet its aftershocks continued to pulse beneath the surface, subtle and relentless, shaping behavior, altering relationships, rewriting the invisible rules by which people navigated their days. For the detectives, the case lingered as an unfinished conversation. They returned to the evidence again and again, not because they doubted the verdict, but because they sought understanding of human frailty, of investigative fallibility, of the thin lines separating routine work from irreversible consequence. In quiet offices late at night, they replayed recorded interrogations, listened to confessions saturated with fear and remorse, studied photographs frozen in the instant before catastrophe. Each review was an exercise in humility, a reminder that certainty is a luxury rarely afforded in the realm of truth. They spoke often of the letter, that first hidden confession which had reignited everything, marveling at its improbable arrival. Who had written it, really? Was it Harlan, testing the waters before surrendering? Was it someone else, a peripheral witness who never fully stepped forward? The official narrative named Harlan as the source, supported by circumstantial evidence and his later cooperation, yet doubts lingered. Linguistic analyses were not conclusive. Postal routes remained imprecise. The possibility that another, still unknown figure had played a role refused to disappear, an unresolved thread in a tapestry otherwise tightly woven. This uncertainty bled into broader questions. If someone else had known, how many others might have suspected? How many times had the truth brushed past opportunity, only to retreat once more into silence? The answers, elusive and uncomfortable, cast long shadows over the community, encouraging a culture of vigilance tempered by mistrust. Neighbors watched one another more closely. Parents tightened curfews. Teachers spoke to students about the importance of reporting threats, of trusting instincts, of breaking cycles of secrecy before they hardened into tragedy. Emily's foundation grew, its reach extending far beyond the borders of the town. Families from distant states reached out, drawn by the promise of understanding and solidarity. Their stories shared a haunting similarity. Loved ones vanished, investigations stalled, years slipping by in agonizing uncertainty. Through these connections, Emily's parents confronted a sobering truth, that their experience, though uniquely painful, was far from isolated. The cold case phenomenon, so often dramatized, was in reality a vast, silent network of unresolved loss. They traveled, speaking in community halls and conference centers, their voices steady despite the emotional toll. They urged persistence, compassion, and institutional reform, advocating for improved data sharing, better funding for forensic technology, and the preservation of evidence that might one day speak. Their words carried the authority of lived experience, each sentence an indictment of complacency, each appeal a plea for empathy. Behind these public efforts, private grief unfolded in quieter ways. Emily's mother kept her daughter's room unchanged, a shrine to suspended time, dusted and arranged as if she might return at any moment. Her father walked long distances at dawn, tracing routes Emily had once driven, imagining her presence beside him, replaying fragments of conversations, of shared jokes, of plans never realized. These rituals became a means of survival, a way to coexist with absence without being consumed by it. The perpetrators, meanwhile, faded into institutional anonymity. Harlan adapted to prison life with subdued compliance, enrolling in counseling programs, attending religious services, seeking fragments of redemption in structured routines. Reed retreated further inward, his interactions minimal, his demeanor hardened. Their names occasionally surfaced in parole hearings and legal briefs, but for most, they became symbols rather than individuals, their humanity eclipsed by the enormity of their actions. Yet the story refused to settle entirely. Years into their sentences, new whispers began to circulate, sparked by a routine audit of evidence storage. A technician cataloging archived materials discovered an overlooked envelope, misfiled among unrelated documents. Inside lay a handwritten note, dated mere days after Emily's disappearance. Its ink faded, its edges yellowed. The message was brief, cryptic. Check the shed behind the workshop before it's cleaned. The name signed at the bottom was unfamiliar, a first name only, followed by an initial. The revelation reignited dormant questions. Had someone attempted to alert authorities early on? Had this message been lost in bureaucratic labyrinth, its warning unheeded? Investigators traced the note's origin, examining postal stamps, paper composition, handwriting samples. The trail suggested a local source, someone embedded within the town's social fabric, someone who might have known more than they ever admitted. This possibility unsettled the narrative of isolated guilt. It hinted at a wider circle of awareness, at complicity extending beyond the men already convicted. The notion that others might have harbored suspicions, perhaps even knowledge, but failed to act, added a new layer of moral complexity. It forced a reevaluation not just of individual culpability, but of collective responsibility. Interviews resumed, this time focusing on peripheral figures from 2005, neighbors, acquaintances, casual associates. Some reacted with genuine surprise, others with defensive irritation. A few exhibited subtle signs of anxiety, their recollections faltering, their statements punctuated by hesitation. Each interaction underscored the fragility of memory, the ease with which truth can be reshaped by time and self-preservation. One name emerged repeatedly: Thomas Calder, a part-time laborer who had worked sporadically for Reed, assisting with odd jobs around the workshop. In the weeks following Emily's disappearance, Calder had abruptly left town, resurfacing years later in another state. Records showed he had struggled with substance abuse and unstable housing, circumstances that complicated efforts to locate him. When investigators finally tracked him down, they found a man worn thin by hardship, his eyes clouded with suspicion and fatigue. Calder's initial responses were evasive, his voice guarded, but as questioning persisted, fissures appeared. He admitted to having overheard fragments of a conversation between Reed and Harlan in the early hours after the disappearance, snatches of panic, references to cleaning, to digging, to silence. Terrified, he claimed he had written the note and mailed it anonymously, then fled, fearing retaliation. Whether his account was entirely truthful remained uncertain, but its plausibility reopened uncomfortable debates about fear, courage, and the human instinct for self-preservation. The late discovery of his warning cast a harsh light on institutional processes. How many similar messages might have slipped through unnoticed? How many opportunities had been lost to procedural oversight? The questions fueled calls for reform, prompting reviews of evidence handling protocols and communication channels. In this way, even years later, the case continued to drive change, its lessons unfolding gradually, relentlessly. For the town, the resurfacing of these details reopened old wounds, stirring a mixture of anger and resignation. Some defended Calder, empathizing with his fear. Others condemned his silence, arguing that any risk would have been justified to save a life. The debate reflected a deeper struggle to reconcile moral ideals with human vulnerability, to acknowledge that courage is unevenly distributed, that fear can paralyze even those who sense impending disaster. As these discussions rippled outward, the cold case transcended its local origins, becoming a touchstone in broader conversations about justice, memory, and accountability. It reminded observers that truth is rarely a single revelation, but a mosaic assembled over time, its pieces scattered, hidden, and sometimes irretrievably lost. And still, in the quiet hours before dawn, when the world seemed momentarily suspended, the river flowed, indifferent yet eternal, carrying with it the echoes of a night that would never fully release its hold on those who remembered, those who investigated, and those who would forever wonder how different the story might have been had a single voice spoken sooner, louder, without fear. The years that followed blurred into a procession of seasons, each one carrying fragments of memory forward, reshaping grief into something quieter, less explosive, yet no less heavy. The town changed, as all places do, but beneath fresh paint and newly paved roads, beneath renovated storefronts and rebuilt parks, the story of Emily's disappearance and death lingered like a watermark, faint yet indelible. It surfaced in casual conversations, in half-finished sentences, in the way people lowered their voices near the river or avoided the gravel pit altogether, as though proximity alone might summon the ghosts of the past. For law enforcement, the case became a benchmark, a reference point invoked whenever a new missing persons report crossed a desk. Detectives who had cut their teeth on Emily's investigation carried its lessons into every subsequent search. Move faster, dig deeper, trust instincts, question silence. Cold cases no longer felt like distant abstractions. They were reminders of unfinished business, of lives suspended in the fragile space between hope and despair. Each new file reopened the wound just enough to keep it from fully scarring over. Emily's foundation grew steadily, its reach extending into digital spaces, its name recognized by families navigating the labyrinth of uncertainty. Online forums and support networks blossomed, uniting strangers through shared anguish and resolve. Within these virtual rooms, stories unfolded in raw detail. Daughters who vanished on late-night drives, sons lost after casual errands, spouses who stepped outside and never returned. The parallels were haunting, each narrative echoing the same terrible refrain, an ordinary moment transformed into permanent absence. Through these connections, patterns emerged. Many cases shared the same initial hurdles: delayed reporting, fragmented evidence, jurisdictional confusion, the slow erosion of leads. The Foundation's advocacy efforts targeted these vulnerabilities, pushing for legislative reforms that would mandate immediate response protocols, cross-agency data sharing, and standardized evidence preservation. Progress came in increments: small policy shifts, pilot programs, incremental funding increases, but each step felt like a tribute to Emily's legacy, a way of transforming tragedy into tangible change. Yet for her parents, activism did not equate to healing. Public purpose coexisted uneasily with private sorrow. Holidays remained fraught, their rituals hollowed by absence. Birthdays passed as quiet acknowledgments rather than celebrations. The simple act of setting an extra place at the table became an emotional minefield, a reminder of what should have been. Over time, they learned to coexist with this reality, to let joy and grief share the same space without one extinguishing the other. In the prison system, the men responsible for Emily's death lived out parallel but distinct narratives. Harlan's cooperation earned him marginal concessions, access to educational programs, supervised participation in restorative justice initiatives. He became a cautionary figure in counseling sessions, recounting the chain of choices that led him from fear to complicity, from silence to imprisonment. His story, stripped of self-pity, was meant to deter others, yet it also underscored the devastating speed with which lives could derail. Reed's path diverged sharply. He withdrew into isolation, refusing counseling, rejecting overtures from spiritual advisors, maintaining a posture of defiant resignation. In rare interviews, he spoke only in clipped phrases, his tone devoid of remorse, his gaze fixed on an indeterminate horizon. To observers, he embodied the chilling reality of unrepentant guilt, a reminder that not all perpetrators seek absolution and that justice, once administered, does not guarantee moral reckoning. Outside prison walls, the question of how such violence could erupt in an otherwise unremarkable community continued to provoke debate. Sociologists and criminologists examined the case, exploring intersections of masculinity, entitlement, and situational stress. They pointed to Reed's history of volatile relationships, to Harlan's pattern of avoidance, to the enabling power of silence. Their analyses fed academic journals and conference panels, yet for those who lived through the ordeal, these frameworks offered only partial solace. Understanding the mechanics of tragedy did not diminish its emotional toll. Every anniversary of Emily's disappearance brought a resurgence of attention. Vigils were held along the river, candles reflecting in dark water, their flames trembling in the night air. Names of other missing individuals were read aloud, expanding the ritual beyond a single loss into a communal act of remembrance. Each gathering reaffirmed a collective promise that no one would be forgotten, that every unanswered question deserved persistence. And yet, as time advanced, the narrative subtly shifted. New generations grew up hearing fragments of the story, its edges softened by retelling. To them, Emily became a symbol rather than a person, her name a shorthand for caution, for vigilance. Teachers referenced the case during safety lessons. Parents invoked it as a warning. In this way, her story embedded itself into the cultural fabric, shaping behavior long after its immediate details faded. Amid this evolving landscape, an unexpected development threatened to reopen old wounds. Advances in forensic technology, specifically in soil analysis and microtrace reconstruction, offer the possibility of revisiting evidence from the original crime scene. A research team proposed re-examining samples collected from the riverbank and gravel pit, suggesting that new methods might reveal overlooked connections, perhaps even identify additional participants or corroborate contested aspects of the confessions. The proposal ignited controversy. Some welcomed the chance for deeper understanding, hoping it might settle lingering doubts. Others feared it would only prolong suffering, dredging up pain best left undisturbed. Emily's parents wrestled with the decision, torn between their desire for complete truth and their longing for peace. Ultimately, they consented, guided by the same resolve that had propelled them from the beginning. No secret, however small, should remain hidden. The reanalysis commenced quietly, without media fanfare, its findings unfolding in the sterile confines of laboratories rather than the charged atmosphere of courtrooms. Scientists isolated microscopic particles, mapping their composition, tracing their origins. Patterns emerged, subtle yet significant, suggesting the presence of a third environment, a location distinct from both the river and the pit. The implication was unsettling. Emily's body might have been moved more than once, introducing an additional chapter to an already harrowing narrative. Investigators revisited Reed's statements, scrutinizing them for omissions. They re-examined Harlan's testimony, searching for hesitations that might betray withheld information. The prospect of another site, another phase of concealment, reignited the sense of pursuit that had once dominated their lives. It was as if the case, long considered resolved, refused to rest, insisting on one more reckoning. Search teams returned to familiar terrain, now guided by geological data and chemical signatures. They explored abandoned barns, remote clearings, derelict structures long reclaimed by nature. Each expedition carried the weight of expectation, the fear of discovering new horrors, the hope of final clarity. Days stretched into weeks, the tension mounting with every unproductive search. Then, in the decaying shell of an old livestock shed miles from the river, they uncovered traces consistent with prolonged human presence, fibers matching Emily's clothing, microscopic blood residues embedded in warped floorboards, faint impressions suggesting a body had once rested there. The discovery suggested a grim intermediary step, a place of temporary concealment, a waypoint in the frantic effort to evade detection. This revelation reframed the narrative, adding layers of deliberation and deceit. It challenged the notion of spontaneous panic, hinting instead at a sequence of calculated decisions. The psychological portrait of the perpetrators darkened, their actions appearing less impulsive, more methodical. For the family, the news reopened grief, transforming settled sorrow into renewed anguish. Each added detail felt like another theft, another violation of their daughter's dignity. Yet alongside the pain came a deeper understanding, a more complete reconstruction of the night that had reshaped their lives. The truth, however brutal, offered a form of closure distinct from acceptance, a clarity that allowed memory to settle into a coherent, if tragic, shape. In this, they found a measure of resolve, reaffirming their commitment to transparency, to ensuring that every fragment of the story, however distressing, be brought to light. And so the cold case, long thought concluded, revealed its final layers, unfolding once more under the relentless scrutiny of time, science, and human persistence, proving that some stories resist neat endings and that the pursuit of truth, once begun, rarely concludes without leaving indelible marks on all who follow its path. The discovery of the abandoned livestock shed shifted the gravity of the entire narrative, dragging the past into a harsher, more merciless light. What had once seemed like a single catastrophic event now unfolded as a sequence of calculated steps, each one extending the cruelty, each one demanding a deeper confrontation with the nature of human choice. Investigators stood inside the warped structure, their flashlights skimming across splintered beams and dust-choked corners, tracing invisible paths of movement, imagining the fear that must have filled this confined space. The air felt heavy, saturated with echoes, as though the building itself remembered. Forensic teams worked in near silence, collecting microfibers, scraping dried residues, photographing scuff marks etched into the floorboards. Every fragment was catalogued, every trace treated as a whisper from the past, an attempt by the scene itself to speak. The findings confirmed the unthinkable. Emily had been held here, alive, if only briefly. This was not merely a waypoint of concealment. It was a chamber of terror, a place where time slowed and dread crystallized. The realization reshaped the emotional landscape. The horror deepened, but so did the resolve to understand. Investigators reconstructed the timeline once more, now factoring in this hidden location. They mapped routes from the river to the shed, from the shed to the gravel pit, overlaying them with cell tower pings, traffic patterns, and known travel times. A clearer picture emerged, one that revealed extended periods during which Emily's fate hung in precarious balance, moments when any intervention, might have altered the outcome. This knowledge haunted everyone involved. It underscored the fragility of human life, the narrow margins between survival and oblivion. It transformed the story from one of tragic accident into a stark meditation on complicity, on the cumulative weight of small decisions that, together, sealed a destiny. Confronted with the new evidence, Harlan's demeanor shifted. In interviews conducted years after his conviction, he broke down, his earlier confessions unraveling into raw, unguarded grief. He admitted that the shed had been his suggestion, a place he believed might buy time, might allow panic to subside, might open a path toward a less catastrophic resolution. Instead, it became another layer of imprisonment, another step away from redemption. His words carried the hollow resonance of hindsight, each syllable soaked in regret. Reed, when informed, reacted with cold detachment, his response measured, almost clinical. He neither confirmed nor denied the implications, his silence a shield honed through years of introspection and self-justification. For investigators, this reaction spoke volumes. It suggested a man who had long ago compartmentalized his actions, sealing them away in a mental vault to preserve a fragile sense of control. The renewed revelations rippled outward, igniting a second wave of public reckoning. Media outlets seized upon the shed as a symbol of hidden brutality, broadcasting its existence as proof that the case still harbored untold depths. Commentary intensified, its tone shifting from sorrow to outrage. Editorials demanded accountability not only from the perpetrators, but from institutions that had failed to uncover these truths sooner. Public forums filled with debates about courage, silence, and the moral cost of inaction. Amid this turbulence, Emily's parents faced an agonizing choice: whether to allow the details to be released in full. They weighed the value of transparency against the intrusion of spectacle, the risk that their daughter's suffering might become fodder for sensationalism. Ultimately, they chose disclosure, guided by the belief that truth, however brutal, must not be censored. In doing so, they reclaimed agency over the narrative, shaping it as a call to vigilance rather than a chronicle of despair. Community meetings were held, their halls packed with residents seeking understanding, catharsis, or simply a space to grieve collectively. Speakers recounted the investigation's twists and turns, the forensic breakthroughs, the painful lessons learned. Counselors and advocates addressed the emotional toll of unresolved trauma, urging openness and mutual support. In these gatherings, the town began to transform shared sorrow into communal resilience, forging bonds strengthened by adversity. For the investigative team, the shed represented both triumph and torment. It validated years of persistence, yet it also exposed the limits of human perception, the blind spots that can persist despite relentless effort. They revisited their own emotional landscapes, acknowledging the quiet toll exacted by prolonged exposure to violence and loss. Some sought therapy. Others leaned on colleagues, finding solace in shared experience. The case, they realized, had altered them irreversibly, etching its lessons into their professional identities. The forensic findings also triggered legal reverberations. Prosecutors reviewed sentencing agreements, exploring whether the newly uncovered evidence warranted additional charges or revisions. While the practical impact was limited, both men already faced lengthy incarceration. The symbolic weight of formal acknowledgement mattered. It affirmed that every facet of the crime would be documented, every act recorded, every truth, once revealed, would stand unaltered in the public record. As the months passed, the intensity of scrutiny gradually subsided, leaving behind a quieter, more contemplative aftermath. The shed was dismantled, its decaying timbers removed, the land reclaimed by vegetation. Yet its memory persisted, an invisible marker etched into the collective consciousness. Those who had stood within its walls carried the experience with them, an indelible reminder of the depths to which fear and desperation can drive human behavior. In private moments, Emily's parents grappled with renewed waves of grief, each detail reopening emotional fissures. Yet alongside the pain grew a profound sense of resolve. They expanded their foundation's mission, incorporating programs focused on early intervention, bystander responsibility, and trauma-informed community response. Their advocacy evolved, embracing a holistic vision of prevention rooted in empathy, education, and accountability. Through their efforts, the story reached classrooms, training academies, and legislative chambers. It became a case study, a cautionary tale, a catalyst for reform. Students dissected its chronology. Officers analyzed its investigative missteps. Lawmakers debated policies, shaped by its lessons. In this way, Emily's life, though tragically brief, exerted a far-reaching influence, shaping practices and perspectives far beyond the boundaries of her hometown. And still, beneath these layers of meaning and action, the emotional core remained unchanged. A young woman had vanished into darkness, and the world had been irrevocably altered in her absence. The river continued its silent journey, the fields swayed beneath indifferent skies, and the rhythms of daily life resumed. Yet the memory of that night persisted, a faint tremor beneath the surface of ordinary days. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the mind drifts between waking and sleep, the echoes of the past seemed closest. In those moments, the questions lingered about choice, about chance, about the fragile intersections that determine fate. And in those lingering echoes, the cold case, though solved, refused to fade, its presence a testament to the enduring power of truth, however late its arrival, to reshape the landscape of memory and meaning. As the years accumulated, the case settled into a strange dual existence, both concluded and perpetually unfinished, its facts fixed, yet its emotional gravity in constant motion. New families arrived in town, unaware of the full history, their lives gradually intersecting with a legacy they could not escape. Old residents carried the story like a scar, invisible yet sensitive, flaring unexpectedly at the smallest provocation. The sight of a dark pickup idling too long at an intersection, the echo of raised voices drifting from a late-night argument, the distant wail of sirens slicing through stillness. Schools incorporated the lessons of the tragedy into curricula, teaching students about personal safety, consent, and the responsibility to speak when something feels wrong. Counselors held sessions addressing fear, trauma, and the corrosive power of silence. These efforts aimed not merely to inform, but to inoculate, to build a generation less inclined to turn away from uncomfortable truths. Yet the burden of prevention felt immense, a constant reminder that vigilance, once relaxed, could yield catastrophic consequences. Emily's foundation evolved into a national voice, its conferences drawing investigators, policymakers, and survivors from across the country. Workshops explored emerging forensic technologies, psychological profiling, and community-based prevention strategies. Panels dissected the anatomy of cold cases, tracing the points at which momentum falters and hope erodes. Each discussion carried an undercurrent of urgency, an unspoken acknowledgement that time is both ally and adversary in the pursuit of justice. Through these gatherings, patterns emerged that transcended individual cases: the paralyzing effect of fear, the seductive comfort of denial, the subtle social pressures that discourage intervention. Participants shared stories of near misses and devastating failures, weaving a collective narrative that underscored the fragility of moral courage. In this context, Emily's story became emblematic, a stark illustration of what can unfold when hesitation eclipses action. Meanwhile, technological advancements continued to reshape investigative landscapes. Artificial intelligence tools sifted through vast datasets, identifying correlations once imperceptible to human analysts. Geographic profiling algorithms reconstructed movement patterns with unprecedented precision. Predictive models offered probabilistic insights into suspect behavior, guiding resource allocation and search strategies. These innovations promised to shrink the window of uncertainty, to compress years of inquiry into months or even weeks. Yet they also introduced new ethical dilemmas, raising questions about privacy, bias, and the boundaries of surveillance. Within this evolving framework, Emily's case was frequently revisited, its data fed into emerging systems as a benchmark. Simulations explored alternate investigative pathways, testing how different decisions might have altered the outcome. In some scenarios, early linkage of minor clues accelerated discovery. In others, random chance played an outsized role, underscoring the unpredictable nature of human events. These exercises offered insight, but also humility, revealing that even perfect information cannot guarantee perfect outcomes. For Emily's parents, the passage of time softened certain edges of grief, while sharpening others. The raw ache of loss gradually transformed into a persistent melancholy, a quiet undercurrent shaping their days. They learned to find moments of peace in small rituals, tending a garden, walking along the river at sunrise, listening to music their daughter once loved. In these acts, they cultivated a fragile equilibrium, balancing remembrance with the necessity of continued living. Their advocacy work brought them into contact with families at every stage of loss, from fresh shock to weary endurance. In these interactions, they became guides, offering hard-won wisdom and compassionate presence. They spoke candidly about the long arc of grief, about its unpredictable rhythms, about the coexistence of sorrow and joy. Their words resonated deeply, forging connections that transcended circumstance, binding strangers through shared humanity. Yet even as they moved forward, they remained vigilant guardians of their daughter's narrative. They challenged sensationalized portrayals, corrected inaccuracies, and insisted upon dignity in retelling. To them, Emily was not a case study or cautionary symbol, but a living memory, deserving of respect and nuance. Through their efforts, the story retained its emotional integrity, resisting reduction to mere spectacle. In the prison system, time exerted its own transformative force. Harlan's health deteriorated, his body bearing the cumulative weight of stress and remorse. In a rare interview granted to a documentary team, he spoke haltingly of regret, of nights haunted by dreams in which he relived the moment he failed to intervene. His testimony, raw and unfiltered, reignited public debate about redemption, punishment, and the possibility of moral rehabilitation. Some saw in his words a glimmer of humanity. Others dismissed them as belated self-interest. The divide reflected enduring tensions in societal attitudes toward justice. Reed, by contrast, remained an enigma. He declined interviews, refused counseling, and maintained a stoic detachment that frustrated observers. Periodic appeals were denied, each rejection reinforcing the permanence of his sentence. Over time, his figure receded into abstraction, a symbol of unrepentant violence rather than a man. In this, he became a cautionary archetype, a reminder of the destructive potential embedded within ordinary facades. As public memory gradually shifted, new cultural artifacts emerged, books, podcasts, and documentaries exploring the case from varied perspectives. Some sought to illuminate investigative breakthroughs. Others delved into psychological analysis. A few ventured into speculative territory, probing hypothetical alternatives and unresolved ambiguities. While these works extended the story's reach, they also risked distorting its essence, prompting ongoing dialogue about responsible storytelling and the ethics of true crime narratives. Within this evolving media landscape, the case continued to provoke introspection. Audiences grappled with their own fascination, questioning the line between empathy and voyeurism, between education and entertainment. These debates mirrored broader societal reckonings, reflecting a growing awareness of the moral implications inherent in consuming stories of suffering. Through all these transformations, the core reality remained unchanged. A life had been lost, and countless others altered in its wake. The cold case, once a dormant file, had become a living legacy, shaping discourse, policy, and personal trajectories. Its ripples extended outward, intersecting with movements for justice reform, victim advocacy, and community resilience. In quiet moments, when the noise of public discourse receded, the town returned to its rhythms. Children played in streets once shadowed by fear. Couples strolled along the riverbank, their laughter mingling with the murmur of water. Elderly residents sat on porches, watching sunsets paint the sky in familiar hues. These scenes testified to the persistence of life, its capacity to endure and regenerate, even in the aftermath of profound loss. Yet the memory of Emily lingered in subtle ways. A mural on a brick wall, depicting her smile amid flowing colors, a scholarship plaque etched with her name, a bench overlooking the river, inviting contemplation. These markers transformed absence into presence, embedding her story within the physical and emotional landscape of the community. And so the narrative continued, not as a closed chapter, but as an ongoing dialogue between past and present, between grief and hope, between silence and the enduring demand for truth. The cold case, once reopened, had never truly closed, its echoes woven into the fabric of time, reminding all who encountered it that every life, however brief, leaves an imprint far greater than the span of its days. The tape does not end with a scream, or a confession, or even a name. It ends with breathing. Slow, ragged, human. And then silence. No click. No mechanical stop. Just a dead stretch of nothing, as if whoever recorded it simply set the device down and walked away, leaving the truth suspended in the air, unfinished, unresolved, and impossible to ignore. In the evidence room, The silence presses against the walls. The investigators sit motionless, eyes fixed on the black plastic rectangle on the table, the red LED no longer glowing. For a moment, nobody speaks. Because once words return, the weight of what they have just heard will become real, permanent, irreversible. Outside, Texas continues its routine. Cars roll through intersections. Schools release children into the afternoon heat. Radios hum in kitchen corners. But inside the task force office, time has fractured. The voice on the tape has reached across 2 decades, dragging the past into the present with a grip that will not loosen. The words are raw, unfiltered, spoken without legal caution or public performance. This is not a confession meant for police. It is a confession meant for the conscience. And that makes it infinitely more dangerous. The technicians enhance the audio. Clean it. Strip away the hiss. Isolate the voice. Every syllable sharpens. The accent, the cadence, the pauses. It is a man in his 30s or 40s, maybe older. A local rhythm. Someone who grew up in this heat, in these streets. Someone who knows the back roads, the dirt tracks, the abandoned barns and dried riverbeds. Someone who has lived among the community, unnoticed, unchallenged, for 20 years. Voice analysis begins immediately. The audio is sent to federal databases. Linguistic experts examine speech patterns. Behavioral profilers dissect emotional spikes, the places where the voice falters, where breath catches, where anger bleeds through restraint. They map the psychology of the speaker, reconstructing a mind from fragments of sound. The conclusion is chillingly consistent. This is not a fantasist. This is not a prank. This is not someone inventing a story. This is someone reliving memory. And memory, when it resurfaces after decades, carries a force no lie can imitate. Within days, a list forms. Not a list of suspects, but a list of voices. Men who lived near the victim. Men who worked late shifts. Men with violent histories. Men who vanished briefly in 2005, then returned as if nothing had happened. Old police reports are reopened. Handwritten notes from long-retired detectives are digitized. Names once dismissed, crossed out, forgotten, begin to glow again under fluorescent light. One name, in particular, begins to surface repeatedly. Not in bold, not with certainty, but with disturbing frequency. A man who lived 3 blocks from the victim. A man who had a brief altercation with her months before she vanished. A man who moved out of state less than a year after the disappearance, then quietly returned 5 years later, purchasing a small house under his wife's name. A man who, for 2 decades, has never once spoken publicly about the case. He is now in his early 60s. Gray hair, stooped posture, a grandfather, a church volunteer, a man whose neighbors describe him as gentle, reserved, helpful, a man who coaches Little League, a man who fixes fences for free, a man who attends every community vigil for unsolved crimes, bowing his head in prayer alongside grieving families. The contrast is unbearable. Surveillance begins discreetly. No flashing lights. No door knocks. Just quiet observation. Investigators track his routines, his habits, his reactions to subtle prompts. When a local news station runs a short segment about new developments in the Texas 2005 cold case, his behavior changes. Not dramatically, just enough. He turns off the television halfway through the broadcast, leaves the room, does not return. That night, he does not sleep. The porch light stays on until dawn. Phone records are subpoenaed. Old landline logs are reconstructed. Rental agreements resurface. Storage unit payments from years ago, long since terminated, reappear in financial archives. One unit, rented under an alias in late 2005, draws attention. It was paid in cash. Canceled abruptly 3 months later. The facility itself shut down in 2010. The land was sold, redeveloped into a strip mall. But beneath the concrete, beneath the polished floors and neon signs, lies earth that has not been touched since the mid-2000s. Ground-penetrating radar is deployed under the cover of nighttime maintenance work. The machine hums across the floor of an empty retail unit, its sensors peering into darkness that sunlight has never reached. Then the screen flickers. An anomaly. A rectangular void beneath the foundation. Too uniform to be natural. Too deep to be incidental. The mall owners are notified. Permits are obtained. Construction crews arrive before sunrise. By noon, the concrete is broken. Dust fills the air. Workers dig carefully, inch by inch, until metal strikes wood. Old. Decayed. But unmistakably human-made. A crate. Inside, wrapped in layers of plastic and tarp, lie fragments of clothing. A shoe. A necklace. And bone. The discovery detonates across the state. News alerts pulse across phones. Helicopters circle. Reporters swarm. Forensic teams descend in full protective gear, their faces hidden behind shields, their movements precise and reverent. Every fragment is cataloged. Every fiber preserved. DNA testing confirms what the community has feared and waited for. These remains belong to the missing woman from 2005. After 20 years, the dead have finally been found. But discovery is not closure. It is ignition. The man is brought in for questioning. Not arrested. Not accused. Just invited. A conversation. A request. He arrives in a pressed button-down shirt, hair neatly combed, wedding ring polished. He brings a Bible. He smiles nervously. He thanks the detectives for their service. Inside the interview room, the air is sterile. White walls. A metal table. 2 chairs. A camera in the corner, its lens unblinking. He sits. Folds his hands. Waits. They do not show him the tape. Not yet. They begin with neutral questions. His life. His work. His family. His memories of 2005. At first, he answers smoothly, rehearsed calm in every syllable. But as the timeline tightens, his voice wavers. Dates blur. Details slip. He contradicts himself, then corrects himself, then retreats into silence. Sweat gathers at his hairline. His fingers tremble. Then they play the tape. At first, he listens with polite confusion. Then recognition flares. Not overt. Not dramatic. Just a minute tightening of the jaw. A fractional widening of the eyes. His breath stutters, barely audible, but unmistakable. The voice on the recording speaks of a mistake, of panic, of trying to erase what could not be undone. And something inside the man fractures. He leans forward. His shoulders collapse inward, as if gravity has suddenly tripled. His hands press against his temples. He whispers a single word. Stop. The detectives do not. When the tape ends, the silence in the room is no longer neutral. It is charged. Heavy, expectant. Minutes pass. Then, in a voice stripped of performance, he begins to speak. Not a denial, not an excuse, a narrative. He describes a night of drinking, a chance encounter, an argument that escalated too fast, a push, a fall, a sound like something breaking. He describes terror, blood, the frantic attempt to clean, to hide, to undo the irreversible. He describes digging in darkness, hands blistering, breath burning. He describes sealing the crate, driving through empty streets, unloading beneath a half-built mall while construction crews slept, burying the evidence beneath concrete that would harden into permanent silence. As he speaks, his voice cracks not with guilt, but with exhaustion. The exhaustion of carrying a secret that no human body is designed to bear for 20 years. But when the detectives ask the final question, why record the confession now? His answer is softer than all the rest. I couldn't sleep anymore. The statement lands with terrifying simplicity. No grand motive. No dramatic trigger. Just the slow erosion of denial by memory. Just dreams that would not fade. Faces that would not disappear. Just a conscience that, after 2 decades, refused to stay buried. The confession is recorded. Signed. Verified. The arrest is made quietly, without spectacle. But outside, the world explodes. The victim's family receives the call at dusk. They sit together in a living room frozen in time, the furniture unchanged since 2005, photographs still hanging at angles they never bothered to fix. When the detective says the words, "Remains recovered, suspect in custody," no one speaks. They simply hold each other, suspended between relief and grief, so immense it has no language. The community reacts in waves. Shock, rage, disbelief. How could a man so familiar, so trusted, so present, harbor something so monstrous? How many times did they shake his hand, let their children play in his yard, accept his help, his kindness, his prayers? The realization is unbearable. But the case is not yet finished. Because confessions, even recorded ones, are fragile things. They must be supported, reinforced, proven. Every detail must align. Every claim must match physical evidence. Prosecutors build the case piece by piece, constructing an unbreakable narrative of fact. They trace the vehicle routes, rebuild the timeline, cross-reference receipts, re-examine witness statements from 2005 with new eyes. And within this painstaking reconstruction, something unexpected emerges. A discrepancy. One detail in the confession does not match the forensic findings. A small thing, almost invisible, but crucial. The location where he claims the fatal blow occurred does not align with blood spatter patterns on the recovered clothing. The direction of trauma suggests a different position, a different sequence, a different moment. The possibility is chilling. What if the story he told is not complete? What if the tape does not hold the entire truth? As the trial date approaches, investigators uncover additional data. Phone records showing a second device present near the original crime scene. A second vehicle registered in the vicinity. A second set of footprints in soil samples preserved since 2005, long overlooked, now reanalyzed with modern technology. The narrative begins to fracture. And with that fracture comes a horrifying question. Was he alone? Or has the Texas 2005 cold case only just begun to reveal its true depth? In the final days before court, prosecutors sit surrounded by files, maps, transcripts, evidence bags. The room smells of coffee and paper and exhaustion. Outside, reporters wait in silence. Families brace themselves. The community holds its breath. Because the truth, once it begins to surface, does not rise cleanly. It comes in fragments, in contradictions, in shadows that stretch beyond the first revelation. And as this case is proven again and again, every answer only sharpens the next mystery. The tape ended in silence, but the story has not. The courtroom fills before dawn, a low murmur of anticipation vibrating beneath the high ceiling, every bench occupied, every aisle lined with standing bodies, cameras clustered like mechanical insects along the walls, their lenses trained on the single empty chair at the center of the room, waiting for a man whose life has already collapsed, waiting for the truth that still refuses to fully reveal itself. Outside, winter rain darkens the streets of Texas, pooling in shallow depressions, reflecting the flashing red and blue of police vehicles, as if the city itself is bleeding color into the asphalt. Inside, the air is dry, brittle, charged with the electricity of unfinished business, the kind that makes hearts pound and breaths shorten. When the accused is let in, there is no outcry, no dramatic gasp, only a collective tightening of silence. He looks smaller than before, shoulders bowed, wrists cuffed, eyes hollowed by nights without sleep. The mask of the gentle neighbor has disintegrated, leaving behind a man worn thin by confession and consequence. Yet even now, there is something withheld, something sealed behind his gaze, as if the truth is not a single door that has been opened, but a corridor of locked rooms stretching far into darkness. The prosecution begins methodically. They lay out the timeline, the disappearance, the frantic search, the years of dead ends, the tape, the excavation, the remains. Each fact is delivered with surgical precision, stripped of emotion, yet each word lands like a hammer blow against the collective memory of the room. Photographs flash onto screens. Maps trace forgotten routes. Forensic charts detail trauma and decomposition. The past is reconstructed not as a story, but as an unyielding architecture of evidence, stone by stone, impossible to dismantle. And still, beneath the weight of proof, the fracture remains. The defense seizes it. They press into the inconsistencies, the microscopic deviations between confession and forensic reality, the second phone ping, the unaccounted vehicle, the second set of footprints. They do not argue innocence. They argue incompleteness. They suggest pressure, exhaustion, a mind unraveling under guilt, weaving a narrative to escape the unbearable ambiguity of not knowing exactly how everything unfolded. They ask whether memory, after 20 years, can ever be fully trusted. They ask whether a single voice can speak for an entire crime. The courtroom listens, rapt, as possibility seeps into certainty, like water into cracked stone. Then, unexpectedly, the accused requests to speak. The judge hesitates. The attorneys exchange glances. The room leans forward as one. He stands slowly, gripping the edge of the table as if steadying himself against an unseen current. His voice, when it comes, is thin, but unwavering. "I told you what I remember," he says. "I told you what I can live with." The sentence hangs in the air, ambiguous, unsettling, its meaning impossible to pin down. "I was there," he continues. "I did terrible things. I buried her. I hid what I could not undo.
But there are pieces that don't belong to me.
And there are names I will not speak." A tremor ripples through the courtroom. Not names he cannot speak. Names he will not. The prosecutors object. The judge intervenes. The statement is struck from record, but the damage is irreversible. The seed has been planted, and it grows instantly, violently, in the collective imagination. Whose names? How many? And why protect them now, when the rest has already been surrendered? He is led away, his shoulders shaking, the echo of his words reverberating long after the doors close behind him. The verdict comes days later.
Guilty.
Life without parole. There is no cheer, no celebration, only exhaustion and a grief that refuses to resolve into anything resembling peace. For the victim's family, the judgment is both an ending and a beginning. They finally have a body to bury, a name to carve into stone, a place to visit with flowers and whispered apologies. But alongside this fragile closure blooms a darker realization. They may never know everything. The funeral is small. Wind bends the grass. Gray clouds press low against the horizon. As the coffin descends, earth rattles softly against polished wood, a sound so final it steals breath from the lungs. The family stands hand in hand, their faces carved by years of waiting, their tears falling not in torrents, but in steady, silent streams. And yet, even here, questions hover. In the weeks that follow, new tips pour in. Anonymous calls. Half-remembered conversations. Long-suppressed suspicions. People who once dismissed their own doubts now speak, emboldened by the collapse of a trusted figure. Old rumors reawaken. Forgotten arguments resurface. The investigation, officially closed, quietly begins to stir again beneath the surface, driven by detectives who cannot accept the possibility that part of the truth still lies buried. One tip stands apart. A voice, distorted by electronic filtering, claims knowledge of a second burial site, a place where the river bends and the trees lean like they're listening. The caller disconnects before questions can be asked. Search teams mobilize at dawn. They comb riverbanks, scan dense woods, probe soft soil. Days stretch into weeks. Nothing definitive emerges. Only fragments. Scraps of fabric. Rusted metal. Traces too degraded to name. Evidence that suggests presence, disturbance, human passage, but stops short of revelation. And so the story remains suspended, balanced between resolution and doubt. The strip mall continues its business. Customers shop, eat, laugh, unaware of what once slept beneath their feet. The church where the accused once prayed still fills every Sunday. Children still chase baseballs across freshly cut grass. The town breathes, lives, moves forward, yet beneath its rhythms lies a fault line of unease, a silent understanding that horror does not always arrive as a stranger, that it can wear familiar faces, speak gentle words, offer helping hands. Years from now, podcasts will dissect the case. Documentaries will reconstruct it frame by frame. Internet forums will debate the missing pieces, the withheld names, the footprints that did not match. Armchair detectives will map theories across glowing screens, chasing patterns in chaos, hunting certainty in shadows. But for those who lived it, the Texas 2005 cold case will never become mere content. It will remain a wound in the landscape, a scar in memory, a reminder that time does not heal everything, that some truths surface only partially, and that some confessions, no matter how detailed, leave behind more questions than answers. Because somewhere, in the silent spaces between what was said and what was not, between what was proven and what was merely suggested, the full story still waits. Waiting in the soil. Waiting in the dark. Waiting for the moment when silence finally decides to speak.